Arlington National Cemetery stood silent under a gray November sky. Rain fell in a steady rhythm, drumming against the shoulders of Colonel Samuel Iron Sam Blackwood as he knelt before the white headstone. His weathered fingers traced the engraved name, Captain James Miller, 1931-1953, Korea. "I kept my promise, Jim," Blackwood whispered. "I never forgot what you taught me." At 58, Samuel Blackwood carried his years with the straight-backed dignity of a man who had spent 4 decades in uniform. His face was a topographical map of experience. Deep-set eyes that had witnessed 3 wars, cheekbones carved by desert winds and jungle humidity, a strong jawline softened only slightly by time. Rain soaked through his civilian coat, but he remained motionless, unmindful of discomfort, a skill honed through countless nights in foxholes and tank turrets. A young groundskeeper approached, umbrella extended in offering, but stopped when he saw Blackwood place a single brass tank shell basting against the headstone. The old colonel nodded at the empty gesture and retreated, understanding intuitively what the groundskeeper could not. Some men carry weather within them far heavier than rain. Blackwood rose slowly, his right knee protesting. A souvenir from Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, 1970. Not the historic winter quarters of Revolutionary soldiers, but the code name for a training exercise that turned lethal when Soviet-trained operatives infiltrated the perimeter. The memory washed over him like the rain. 3 M48 Patton tanks caught in a crossfire. Radio silence. Columns of smoke rising from the lead vehicle. Then Major Blackwood making the call no commander wanted to make, breaking formation to charge the hidden position. The cannon blast from his tank silhouetting pine trees against orange flame. 3 enemy tanks destroyed in less than 4 minutes. 7 American lives saved. 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. A victory that never appeared in any newspaper. Colonel Blackwood, a young Army lieutenant, stood at attention nearby, rainwater streaming from his service cap. "General Schwarzkopf sends his compliments, sir. Your presence is requested at the Pentagon immediately." Blackwood studied the lieutenant. "I'm on terminal wave. I'm under terminal leave, son. Retirement paperwork's already processed." "Yes, sir." The general specifically mentioned that fact. "He said to tell you this concerns the last dance." "His words, sir." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but something kindled behind his eyes. The last dance was a code phrase from Desert One, the failed Iranian hostage rescue mission. Only those who had been in the room during the operation's planning would recognize it. Did he now? Blackwood looked once more at the row of headstones, each marking a man he had commanded, each a promise he had made. "Tell the general I'll be there in an hour." As his government-issued sedan navigated the rain-slicked streets of Washington, Blackwood's mind drifted to his father, Master Sergeant William Blackwood, 2nd Armored Division under Patton. The old man had installed a love of tanks in Sam before he could walk, building models with him on the kitchen table of their Kentucky home. William had survived the bloodbath of the Bulge, only to die of a heart attack when Sam was 15, leaving behind dog tags, a silver star, and the unspoken expectation that a Blackwood served. And before him, Sam's grandfather, Thomas Blackwood, who had transitioned from horse cavalry to the first tanks in the Great War. 3 generations of men who lived by the code of armor: protect your crew, accomplish the mission, never retreat. The Pentagon loomed ahead, a massive concrete statement of American military might. Inside its 5 concentric rings, officers and civilians hurried through fluorescent-lit corridors, electronic badges swinging from lanyards. Blackwood followed his escort, feeling increasingly out of place in his civilian clothes. The impending retirement had been his wife Margaret's idea. 40 years was enough, she'd said. Time to fish the lakes of Kentucky and spoil their grandchildren. Yet here he was, answering one more call. General Norman Schwarzkopf's office reflected the man. Organized, unpretentious, with careful attention to detail. Maps of the Middle East covered one wall. The stocky general rose from behind his desk, extending a hand. "Sam, thanks for coming in, especially today." The 2 men had served together in Vietnam, formed a bond in the crucible of jungle warfare that transcended rank. "You used the last dance code, Norm. Not much choice." Schwarzkopf gestured to a chair. "Coffee or something stronger?" "Coffee's fine. What's so important it couldn't wait until after I put my uniform in mothballs." The general poured 2 cups from a pot that smelled military-grade strong. "We've got a situation at Fort Knox, the 77th Tank Battalion." "Desert Wolves," Blackwood nodded. Heard they've fallen on hard times. That's diplomatic. They're a disaster. Third straight failed readiness evaluation. Lowest marksmanship scores in the Armored Corps. 2 training fatalities in 18 months. Schwarzkopf pushed a folder across the desk. We're considering deactivation. Blackwood opened the folder, scanning efficiency reports and disciplinary actions. What happened? The 77th had a solid reputation during Vietnam. Leadership vacuum, quick rotation of commanding officers. Low morale, pick your poison. Schwarzkopf leaned forward. I need you to take command, Sam. Blackwood looked up sharply. I'm 3 weeks from retirement. Got the fishing boat picked out and everything. 30 days, that's all I'm asking. Evaluate whether they can be salvaged or if we should disband the unit. Blackwood closed the folder. There's more to this. You could send any colonel for an evaluation. Schwarzkopf walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Operation Rattlesnake starts in 4 weeks. Major training exercise in the Mojave. The 77th is scheduled against the 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment. The Red Eagles. Blackwood whistled low. They're running the new M1 Abrams. Latest depleted uranium armor package. 120mm smoothbore thermal imaging. He shook his head. What are the Desert Wolves equipped with? M60 Pattons? Jesus, Norm. That's a slaughter waiting to happen. Hence my concern. The general returned to his seat. The exercise has significant congressional oversight. Defense contractors, foreign military observers. If the 77th performs poorly, it doesn't just reflect on them. The entire tank program comes under scrutiny. Blackwood leaned back, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. And if I decline this honor, then I find another old warhorse to take the assignment. Schwarzkopf smiled thinly. But they won't have your experience, or your particular history with Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison. The name hit Blackwood like a physical blow. Harrison commands the Red Eagles now? As of 3 months ago, images flashed through Blackwood's mind. A younger Harrison than his protege, requesting air support for a village allegedly harboring Viet Cong. Blackwood refusing the order, sensing something wrong. Harrison going over his head. The village destroyed. 43 civilians dead. No enemy combatants found. The subsequent investigation. Harrison's testimony painting Blackwood as overcautious, indecisive. The official reprimand that had stalled Blackwood's career for years, while Harrison continued to climb the ranks. He's being groomed for general, Schwarzkopf said quietly, watching the emotions cross his old friend's face. This exercise could be his final stepping stone. Blackwood set his coffee down, untouched. You're manipulating me, Norm. I prefer to think of it as motivating you. The general slid a set of orders across the desk. Report to Fort Knox tomorrow, full command authority, whatever resources you need. Blackwood stared at the papers, feeling the years rolling backward. One final mission, one last chance to face Harrison, to prove who had been right all those years ago. 30 days, he said finally, not a day more. That's all I ask. Schwarzkopf stood, extending his hand. Good hunting, Iron Sam. As Blackwood drove home through the fading daylight, he mentally composed the conversation he would have with Margaret. She wouldn't be pleased. Their retirement plans derailed, even temporarily. But she had been an Army wife for 36 years. She understood duty. His thoughts turned to the Desert Wolves and the impossible task ahead. 3 weeks to transform a broken unit into something that could stand against the most advanced tanks in the world. 3 weeks to prepare for Harrison, who would have every advantage. Better equipment, better trained crews, superior numbers. A memory surfaced. His father's voice from childhood. Sammy, a tank ain't just steel and treads. It's the men inside that make the difference. A brave crew in a Sherman could take down a Tiger if they had the heart and the know-how. Blackwood's hands tightened on the steering wheel. One last dance indeed. Chapter 2. Mission Impossible. Fort Knox sprawled across the Kentucky landscape like a small city of concrete and steel. As Blackwood's staff car passed through the main gate, the morning sun glinted off distant firing ranges and motor pools. The air carried the unmistakable scent of diesel fuel, gun oil, and ambition. Blackwood had traded his civilian clothes for a freshly pressed uniform, 4 silver eagles gleaming on his collar. His campaign ribbons told the story of a career that stretched from Korea to Desert Storm, a walking museum of American military interventions. The weight of the uniform felt right, like returning to a conversation interrupted mid-sentence. His driver, a young specialist, stole glances in the rearview mirror. "Something on your mind, specialist?" Blackwood asked. "Sorry, sir, just the guys are talking about you taking command of the 77th. "And what are they saying?" The specialist hesitated. "That it's either a punishment or a suicide mission, sir." Blackwood nodded. "Fair assessment. What do you think?" Surprised at being asked his opinion, the young soldier considered before answering. "I think someone must believe they're worth saving, sir." "Let's hope that someone is right." The 77th Tank Battalion headquarters occupied a weathered building near the edge of the base. The sign out front, once proud with its snarling wolf logo, now hung at an angle, paint peeling. The ground showed the subtle signs of a unit in decline, weeds pushing through sidewalk cracks, cigarette butts accumulated in corners, bulletin boards with outdated notices. Inside, a staff sergeant scrambled to his feet as Blackwood entered, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. "Colonel Blackwood, sir, we weren't expecting you until 0900. "I've never seen the benefit in being predictably punctual, Sergeant." Blackwood glanced at the man's nameplate. "Doyle, where's the battalion staff?" "Morning briefing in conference room B, sir. Major Wilson is acting commander until now," Blackwood finished, striding past him. The briefing room fell silent as Blackwood entered. A dozen officers and senior NCOs stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. At the head of the table, a major in his 30s paused mid-sentence, marker in hand before a whiteboard covered with maintenance statistics. "As you were," Blackwood said, taking a seat at the back. "Please continue, Major." The Major, Wilson, according to his nameplate, cleared his throat. "As I was saying, we're currently at 68% operational readiness. 14 tanks fully operational, 6 down for scheduled maintenance, 4 with critical system failures." "What kind of failures?" Blackwood asked. Wilson blinked at the interruption. "Sir, the 4 critical failures. What specifically is wrong with them?" "I'd have to check with the maintenance officer for details, sir." Blackwood turned his attention to a captain with grease-stained hands at the far end of the table. "You'd be that officer, I assume?" The captain straightened. "Yes, sir. Captain Reyes, battalion maintenance." "So what's wrong with those tanks, Captain?" "2 have transmission issues. 1 has a faulty fire control computer. The 4th has a cracked gun tube." Blackwood nodded. "Parts available?" "For the transmissions and computer, yes, sir. The gun tube is back-ordered. Low priority since the M60s are being phased out." The room tensed at this blunt assessment of their equipment's obsolescence. "Thank you for your honesty, Captain." Blackwood stood, moving to the front of the room. "Major Wilson, I'll take it from here." Wilson surrendered his position with evident relief, sliding into a vacant chair. Blackwood surveyed the room, mentally cataloging faces, reading body language. Most avoided eye contact, the universal sign of a unit expecting bad news. "Gentlemen, I'm Colonel Samuel Blackwood. As of 0700 this morning, I've assumed command of the 77th Tank Battalion. I've reviewed your recent performance metrics. They make for sobering reading." He let the statement hang in the air. "I understand you're scheduled to participate in Operation Rattlesnake in 3 weeks. You'll be facing the 1st Battalion of the 66th Armor Regiment. They're equipped with M1 Abrams tanks. You have M60 Pattons." A lieutenant at the table couldn't contain himself. "Sir, that's not a fair fight. The Abrams outclasses us in every category." "Life isn't fair, Lieutenant." "Parker, sir. Michael Parker." "Life isn't fair, Lieutenant Parker. Neither is warfare. You fight with what you have against what's in front of you." Blackwood erased the maintenance statistics and drew a simple diagram on the whiteboard. 3 tanks facing an array of 9. These odds approximately represent what you'll be facing. 3-to-1 numerical superiority for the Red Eagles, plus technological advantage. The room remained silent, the hopelessness palpable. "Before I continue, I want to hear from each of you. 1 sentence, your assessment of this battalion's current state." He pointed to Wilson first, then moved around the table. The responses painted a grim picture: underfunded and overlooked, demoralized but not defeated, struggling with outdated equipment, a dumping ground for problem soldiers, the last stop before civilian life. When the circle completed, Blackwood nodded. "Thank you for your candor. Now let me be equally candid. I've been sent here to determine whether this battalion should be deactivated." Murmurs rippled through the room. "That decision will largely depend on your performance in Operation Rattlesnake." Blackwood let that sink in before continuing. "I understand the odds. I understand the equipment disparity. What I don't yet understand is whether the men of the Desert Wolves still have a fighting spirit. He moved to a wall displaying the battalion's battle streamers and unit citations, most dating back to Vietnam or earlier. This battalion has a proud history. From the Ardennes to the Mekong Delta, the Desert Wolves earned their reputation through blood and courage. That legacy now rests in your hands. Blackwood turned back to the room. I need your company commanders and platoon leaders in this room at 1300 hours. Maintenance officers, I want a complete inventory of every part, tool, and resource by 1500. Training officers, bring all range schedules and qualification records. Before I decide whether to fight for this unit's survival, I need to know exactly what I'm working with. As the officers began gathering their materials, a tall lieutenant colonel entered the room. Michael Rawlins, according to his nameplate, carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. His expression suggested he wasn't pleased to find someone else leading the briefing. "Colonel Blackwood," he said, offering a textbook salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Rawlins, Battalion Executive Officer. I apologize for my tardiness. I was at division headquarters discussing our rattlesnake preparation." Blackwood returned the salute. "No apology necessary, Colonel. Your timing is excellent. I was just about to review personnel files. Yours would be at the top of my list." Something flashed in Rawlins' eyes. Wariness, perhaps? "I'm at your disposal, sir." "Good. Walk with me." Outside, the Kentucky morning had blossomed into full, humid heat. The two officers moved toward the motor pool, an unspoken destination. "How long have you been XO here, Rawlins?" 8 months, sir." "And before that?" 3rd Infantry Division in Germany, Tank Company Commander. "Combat experience?" "Grenada, Panama, First Gulf War." Blackwood nodded. "A solid record. Your thoughts on the battalion's readiness?" Rawlins measured his words carefully. "The men are better than their reputation suggests. Morale has suffered from constant leadership changes and the knowledge that we're operating legacy equipment." "Legacy equipment?" Blackwood repeated with a hint of amusement. "That's a diplomatic way of saying obsolete." "The M60A3 remains a capable platform, sir, despite its age." They reached the motor pool, where a row of olive-drab tanks sat in varying states of maintenance. Mechanics swarmed over 2 with engine decks removed. The distinctive angular profile of the M60 Patton, a design dating back to the late 1950s, conveyed both menace and nostalgia. Blackwood approached the nearest tank, running his hand along the massive gun barrel. "I commanded an M60 in Vietnam, later variants in Germany during the Cold War. It's a workhorse, reliable, forgiving of crew errors." He patted the steel hull. "But it's not an Abrams." Rawlins remained silent, watching his new commander commune with the machine. "The Abrams has depleted uranium armor, thermal imaging, gas turbine engine, advanced fire control systems that can hit a moving target while the tank itself is moving at 30 miles per hour. Blackwood turned to his XO. "What do these have that could possibly compete?" "Nothing, sir, if we're talking about pure technical specifications." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "But we're not just talking specifications, are we, Colonel?" A ghost of a smile crossed Rawlins' face. "No, sir. Tanks don't fight tanks. Tank crews fight tank crews." "Precisely." Blackwood climbed onto the front slope of the M60, agile despite his age. "Any tank commander worth his salt knows that technology is only one factor. Training, tactics, terrain knowledge, crew coordination. These often matter more." He gestured for Rawlins to join him beside the turret. "Tell me about the opposition. What do you know about Lieutenant Colonel Harrison?" "Reputation says he's brilliant but ruthless. West Point graduate, advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and military strategy. His battalion has won the Sullivan Cup twice under his command." "The Army's tank competition," Blackwood nodded. "Impressive. He's bringing 27 M1 A1s to Rattlesnake, full complement of support vehicles. The best crews in the Armored Corps." Blackwood's eyes narrowed at the mention of the number. 27, that's 3 companies at full strength plus his command tank." "Yes, sir, against our 14 operational M60s. "And division headquarters approved this matchup?" Rawlins hesitated. General Campbell personally signed off on the exercise parameters. The name triggered an internal alarm in Blackwood's mind. Frank Campbell had been a young captain on Harrison's staff during the Vietnam investigation. Now a 2-star general with oversight of training operations. "I see," was all Blackwood said, though his mind was racing through implications. "And what's your assessment of our chances, Colonel Rawlins?" "Objectively speaking, 0, sir. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and technologically outclassed. Yet I sense you're not ready to surrender." Rawlins straightened. The desert wolves still have teeth, sir. We may be the underdogs, but with the right strategy. Blackwood clapped the younger officer on the shoulder. That's what I wanted to hear. He jumped down from the tank with surprising agility. Now show me your best crew. I want to see what we're working with. As they walked deeper into the motor pool, Blackwood's mind calculated possibilities. The scenario seemed designed for failure, pitting obsolete M60s against state-of-the-art Abrams at 3-to-1 odds. The involvement of General Campbell suggested this might be more than a routine training exercise. Someone had engineered this confrontation, and Blackwood was beginning to suspect why. The 77th represented the old guard, Vietnam-era tactics and equipment. Harrison's 66th embodied the future: technology, precision, overwhelming firepower. A decisive victory would justify accelerating the retirement of legacy systems and the men who operated them. This wasn't just about a training exercise. It was about the future direction of American armored warfare, and someone had chosen Samuel Blackwood as the sacrificial lamb, the old warrior sent out for one last defeat. Unless, of course, he could rewrite the ending. Chapter 3. Building an Army from Ruins. The desert sun hammered down on Range Complex Bravo, turning the Kentucky landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Blackwood stood atop an observation tower, binoculars trained on a distant M60 tank maneuvering through an obstacle course. Beside him, Rawlins checked his stopwatch as the tank crashed through a wooden barricade and pivoted sharply around a concrete barrier. Tank 3 approaching final objective, announced the range officer over the radio. The Patton accelerated, its 750 horsepower diesel engine roaring as it charged up a steep embankment. At the crest, it stopped abruptly, traversed its turret, and fired at the target 1,500 meters downrange. The concussion of the 105mm cannon rolled across the training ground like thunder. Hit, confirmed the range officer. Center mass. Blackwood lowered his binoculars. Time? Rawlins clicked his stopwatch. 4 minutes, 37 seconds. 2 minutes faster than yesterday. Still not good enough. Blackwood raised the radio to his lips. Tank 3, return to starting position. Run it again. The tank commander's voice crackled through static. Sir, this is our 4th consecutive run. Engine temperature is approaching redline. Then you'll need to adjust your driving technique, Blackwood replied evenly. The enemy won't grant you a cooling break. Run it again. For 3 days, Blackwood had pushed the battalion relentlessly. Extended gunnery practice, tactical maneuvers, maintenance drills. He'd personally interviewed every tank commander, gunner, driver, and loader. He'd inspected barracks, reviewed personnel files, and evaluated supply chains. The picture that emerged confirmed his initial assessment: a unit with potential, hamstrung by poor leadership and neglect. They're improving, Rawlins observed as the tank began its 5th run. This crew shaved nearly 3 minutes off their time since morning. Improvement isn't enough, Blackwood said. We need transformation. The afternoon briefing gathered the battalion's leadership in a sweltering classroom. Maps of the Mojave Desert covered one wall, satellite imagery showing the Operation Rattlesnake exercise area. Tank company commanders sat in the front row, maintenance and support staff behind them. Blackwood entered precisely at 1500 hours, carrying a stack of folders. He dropped them on the desk with an intentionally dramatic thud. Gentlemen, I've completed my evaluation of this battalion. The results are not encouraging. He paced before them, hands clasped behind his back. Your gunnery scores are 22% below armor branch standards. Your maintenance backlog is twice the acceptable level. Your physical fitness test results would embarrass a quartermaster company. He stopped, surveying their faces. In short, you are not ready for the challenge ahead. The room remained silent, officers staring straight ahead with the stoic expressions of men accustomed to criticism. However, Blackwood continued, I've also observed qualities that statistics don't capture: determination, resilience, ingenuity, the raw material of a fighting unit. He moved to the map wall, tapping the Mojave terrain. Operation Rattlesnake begins in 17 days. We will face the 66th Armor Regiment, equipped with M1 Abrams tanks, in a force-on-force exercise designed to simulate desert warfare. The objective is simple: destroy the enemy force or capture their headquarters within a 72-hour window. Lieutenant Parker raised his hand. Sir, with respect, even if all our tanks were operational, we'd be outnumbered 2-to-1. With our current readiness state, it's closer to 3-to-1. Your math is accurate, Lieutenant, Blackwood acknowledged. which is why we won't be fighting a conventional battle. He unveiled a large tactical map covered with hand-drawn annotations. The Abrams is superior in almost every metric: armor protection, main gun power, targeting systems, mobility. It's designed to fight and win through technological dominance. But technology has limitations. Blackwood circled 3 areas on the map. The exercise area contains narrow ravines where the Abrams' width becomes a liability, ridge lines where its profile makes it visible, soft sand where its weight causes it to sink deeper than our lighter M60s. He looked up at the officers. We can't match their firepower or protection, but we can exploit the terrain, use unconventional tactics, and target their weaknesses. Captain Reyes, the maintenance officer, leaned forward. What weaknesses, sir? The Abrams is practically invulnerable to our 105mm rounds, even at close range. No tank is invulnerable, Captain. The Abrams has thinner armor at the rear. Its turbine engine consumes fuel at an alarming rate. Its thermal imaging can be confused by multiple heat sources. Blackwood tapped the map again. More importantly, it's operated by human beings who can make mistakes when pressured. He began outlining his strategy, a guerrilla approach to tank warfare. Small, mobile groups operating independently, hit-and-run attacks, ambushes from defilade positions, night operations when the desert wolves would have the advantage of familiarity with the terrain. This is hardly conventional armored doctrine, observed Major Wilson. Conventional doctrine assumes rough parity and capabilities, Blackwood replied. We need to rewrite the rules of engagement. For the next hour, Blackwood detailed his plan, assigning specific tasks to each company. When he finished, the room buzzed with a nervous energy, not quite confidence, but no longer resignation. Questions, Blackwood asked. Rollins spoke for the first time. Sir, what you're proposing borders on irregular warfare. It's unorthodox for an armored battalion. Does that concern you, Colonel? Not if it works. Rollins studied the map, but it requires perfect execution from crews who have been underperforming for months. Then we have 17 days to forge them into the unit they need to be. Blackwood addressed the room. From this moment, we operate on a war footing, 24-hour maintenance operations, gunnery practice day and night, every tank operational, every crew qualified. He surveyed their faces. Any man who doesn't believe this is possible should request transfer immediately. I need believers, not doubters. No one moved. Good. Company commanders remain, everyone else dismissed. As the room cleared, Blackwood gathered his 4 company commanders, Wilson, Parker, and 2 captains named Rodriguez and Taylor. These men would form the core of his leadership team. Gentlemen, what I'm about to share doesn't leave this room. Blackwood's voice dropped. I have reason to believe Operation Rattlesnake is more than a routine exercise. He explained his suspicions about General Campbell and the connection to Harrison. You're suggesting this is a setup? Rodriguez asked, incredulous. I'm suggesting we're being tested in ways beyond the official parameters. The 77th represents the old guard, Vietnam-era tactics, Cold War equipment. Harrison's 66th embodies the future. Technology, precision, overwhelming firepower. Blackwood leaned against the desk. Some in the Pentagon want to accelerate the transition. They need a demonstration of the old approach failing spectacularly against the new. Parker shook his head. So we're meant to lose, to justify more Abrams procurement and retirement of M60 units. That's my assessment. Blackwood looked each officer in the eye, which means our mission extends beyond the exercise itself. We're fighting for the reputation of every soldier who served in a Patton tank, for the validation of experience over technology. Taylor, the youngest of the captains, frowned. Sir, with all due respect, the Abrams is superior. Maybe this transition is necessary. The transition is inevitable, Captain, Blackwood agreed. But how we make that transition matters. Do we discard decades of institutional knowledge because it doesn't fit the new paradigm? Or do we integrate what works from both approaches? He stood straight, his voice firm with conviction. I've faced Harrison before, in Vietnam. He believes absolutely in technological solutions, in overwhelming force. What he doesn't respect is adaptability, improvisation, the human element of warfare. Blackwood moved to the window, looking out at the tank park where crews worked in the fading daylight. Each of you commands roughly 30 men. By next week, I want that number cut to 20. Your very best. We'll consolidate crews, ensuring every tank has an experienced commander and gunner. That leaves nearly half the battalion unassigned, Wilson pointed out. They'll form our opposition force during training. Every day from now until deployment, you'll face reactive scenarios designed to simulate the Abrams capabilities. Rollins entered the room, carrying a folder stamped with red borders. Colonel, message from division, eyes only. Blackwood took the folder, scanning its contents. His expression darkened. Change of plans, gentlemen. Operation Rattlesnake has been moved up. We deploy in 12 days, not 17. The officers exchange alarmed glances. There's more. The exercise parameters have expanded. In addition to force-on-force engagement, we'll be evaluated on nuclear, biological, chemical response, aerial threat reaction, and counterinsurgency operations. That's 3 additional mission sets, Rollins said, with no additional preparation time. Blackwood closed the folder. Like I said, this isn't just an exercise. He turned to his officers. Adjust your training grenades. Focus on NBC drills tomorrow, air defense the following day. As the commanders filed out, Rollins remained behind. You expected this, he said. It wasn't a question. I expected something, Blackwood admitted. Campbell's making his move sooner than anticipated. Sir, maybe you should inform General Schwarzkopf about these irregularities. Blackwood shook his head. And say what? That I suspect a conspiracy because the exercise is challenging? That would only reinforce the narrative that we're looking for excuses. He gathered his maps. No, Colonel, we prepare, we adapt, we overcome. And if we can't? Blackwood paused at the door. Then the Desert Wolves die with dignity, not whimpers. That evening, Blackwood walked alone through the tank park. Maintenance crews worked under floodlights, the clang of tools against metal creating a symphony of determination. Welding torches cast blue-white glows against the night sky. Men called to each other, passing tools and advice with equal urgency. He approached a tank where a grizzled sergeant directed repairs on a thrown track. How's it coming, Sergeant? The man straightened, wiping grease-stained hands on his coveralls. Colonel Blackwood, didn't see you there, sir. Henry Jefferson, right? Tank Commander, 3rd Platoon? Yes, sir. Jefferson seemed surprised at being recognized. At 45, he was older than most NCOs of his rank. A career tanker who had chosen to remain with the vehicles he loved rather than pursue higher positions. You were an Olympic alternate in biathlon, 1980, Blackwood said. Never missed a qualification on the tank gunnery range in 17 years of service. Jefferson's weathered face broke into a smile. You've been reading personnel files pretty closely, sir. I make it a point to know my best shooters. Blackwood nodded toward the tank. This your regular vehicle? Yes, sir. Old Redemption here has seen me through 2 deployments. Blackwood ran a hand along the scarred turret. M60A3. The fire control system is analog, not digital like the Abrams. Requires a gunner who understands ballistic principles, who can adjust for variables manually. That'd be me, sir. Jefferson patted the gun mantlet affectionately. These old girls have quirks, but they'll put steel on target if you treat them right. I need your help, Sergeant Jefferson. Blackwood's tone turned serious. I need gunners who can hit what they aim at, first round every time, under pressure, against superior opposition. Jefferson studied the colonel thoughtfully. You're talking about Rattlesnake, going up against the Abrams. That's right. Permission to speak freely, sir? Always. Those Abrams have thermal imaging, computerized fire control, stabilized guns that can hit while moving at speed. Our best gunners would struggle to match that technology. Blackwood nodded. All true, but tell me something, Sergeant. In your experience, how many tank commanders rely too heavily on their technology? Who might fall apart if that technology were compromised? A slow smile spread across Jefferson's face. Most of them, sir, especially the younger ones. They trust the computer more than their eyes. Exactly. Blackwood lowered his voice. I'm assembling a special platoon. 4 tanks, our very best crews, for a mission that will require exceptional gunnery skills and unorthodox tactics. Jefferson straightened. I'd be honored to be considered, sir. You're not just considered, Sergeant. You're my first pick. Blackwood extended his hand. I need men who remember how we fought before computers did our thinking for us. As they shook hands, Blackwood noted the strength in the older man's grip. Here was a soldier who understood what they were facing, not just superior technology, but a mindset that placed absolute faith in that technology. Report to my office tomorrow, 0600. Bring your loader and driver. We have specialized training to conduct. Yes, sir, we'll be there. As Blackwood walked away, he felt something he hadn't expected, a flicker of genuine hope. In Jefferson, he recognized a kindred spirit, a tanker from the old school who understood that while technology changed, the fundamental principles of armored warfare remained constant. Throughout the night, Blackwood continued his rounds, identifying key personnel. Tommy Collins, a third-generation tanker from Texas, whose father had served under Blackwood in Germany. David Martinez, a young loader with remarkable speed and steady hands under pressure. Michael Rawlins, whose initial skepticism was evolving into determined support. By dawn, Blackwood had assembled the core of his fighting force, men who combined experience, skill, and the desperate hunger of underdogs. Men who understood that their battalion's survival depended on their performance in the coming trial. As he watched the sun rise over Fort Knox, Blackwood felt the familiar weight of command, the lives that would be shaped by his decisions, the careers that hung in the balance. But beneath that weight was something else, the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing what he was born to do. One final battle, one last chance to prove that the human element remained the decisive factor in warfare, regardless of technological advantage. The desert wolves were stirring from their slumber, preparing to bare their teeth once more. In his temporary quarters, Blackwood opened a small toiletry kit and removed an unmarked pill bottle. With practiced discretion, he swallowed 2 tablets dry, grimacing at the bitter taste. The medication would keep the pain at bay for another day, pain he had revealed to no one at Fort Knox. The diagnosis had come 3 months earlier. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. Treatment he had postponed to accept this final command. Margaret knew, of course, had raged and wept and finally understood. This wasn't just duty, it was his legacy. His final stand would be here, not in a sterile hospital room. As the medication took effect, dulling the persistent ache in his abdomen, Blackwood straightened his uniform and prepared to meet his men. They would see only the Iron Colonel, not the dying man beneath. Some sacrifices remained private, even in the Brotherhood of Arms. Dawn broke over Fort Knox with a promise of another scorching Kentucky day. Colonel Samuel Blackwood stood motionless on the firing range as a blood-orange sun crested the distant hills. The air hung heavy with humidity, pressing down like a physical weight. For a moment, the pain in his abdomen flared, a reminder of the battle being waged inside his body. He swallowed dry, pushing the sensation away, focusing instead on the task at hand. Before him, 4 M60 Patton tanks sat in perfect alignment, their silhouettes stark against the brightening sky. The crew stood at attention beside their vehicles, hand-picked men representing the best the Desert Wolves had to offer. Sergeant Jefferson among them, his weathered face impassive, eyes alert. "At ease," Blackwood called, approaching the assembled men. 20 soldiers in all, 4 complete crews with a mix of experience levels from Jefferson's decades of service to young Martinez's barely 2 years. "Gentlemen, you've been selected for a special mission within Operation Rattlesnake," Blackwood's voice carried across the still morning air. "Over the next 12 days, you will undergo training unlike anything in the standard manual. You will learn to fight as your grandfathers did, with cunning, with precision, with the understanding that the man, not the machine, determines victory." He moved to a wooden table where 4 antique objects rested. As the crews gathered around, curiosity evident on their faces, Blackwood lifted one. A gunner's quadrant, Korean War vintage. He held up the metal device, its brass fittings gleaming in the early light. Before digital fire control systems, before laser rangefinders, men used these to calculate elevation angles manually. Jefferson nodded in recognition while younger soldiers looked bewildered. "Today, you begin learning how to fight when technology fails." Blackwood pointed to the tanks. "The Abrams has superior systems in every category, but systems can be disrupted. Sensors can be fooled. Computers can miscalculate. When that happens, the crew that knows the fundamentals prevails." For the next hour, Blackwood outlined a training regimen that seemed pulled from another era. Manual range estimation, celestial navigation, firing solutions calculated by hand, techniques long since abandoned with the advent of computerized systems. "Sir," Lieutenant Parker interjected, "these methods are outdated. We've evolved beyond them for good reason." "Have we, Lieutenant?" Blackwood approached one of the tanks, placing a hand on its turret. "What happens when an EMP disrupts your electronics? When smoke obscures your thermal imaging? When radio silence prevents target coordination?" He looked across the faces, letting the question sink in. The Abrams crews rely absolutely on their technology. They trust it implicitly. That creates a vulnerability we can exploit. He tapped the steel hull. These M60s are dinosaurs, yes, but dinosaurs ruled the Earth for millions of years. They knew something about survival. Martinez, the young loader, raised his hand. Colonel, with respect, even if we master these old techniques, how does that overcome their armor advantage? Our 105mm rounds can't penetrate Abrams' frontal armor. An excellent question, Specialist. Blackwood smiled. Who said anything about engaging them frontally? Over the following days, the special platoon trained relentlessly under Blackwood's direct supervision. While the rest of the battalion continued standard preparation, these four crews were separated, focusing on unconventional tactics drawn from Blackwood's decades of experience. On the third morning, Blackwood led them to an isolated section of the base where maintenance crews had stripped an M60 to its bare components. Parts lay organized on tarps around the skeletal frame. Today, you learn your tanks from the inside out, Blackwood announced. Every bolt, every wire, every linkage. By nightfall, I want each of you able to diagnose and repair your vehicle under combat conditions. Tommy Collins, the Texan driver, examined the disassembled transmission with appreciation. Sir, this is beyond what drivers typically need to know. In most units, perhaps. Blackwood knelt beside him, ignoring the pain that shot through his knee. But we're not preparing for typical engagement. We're preparing for when everything goes wrong. When you're alone, outnumbered, with no support. In those moments, the difference between victory and defeat might be your ability to jury-rig a broken track linkage or bypass a damaged electrical system. For hours, they dismantled and reassembled components. Blackwood and the battalion's senior mechanics guiding them through modifications that would give the aging tanks whatever edge could be found. They removed unnecessary weight, recalibrated fuel systems for maximum efficiency, and reinforced vulnerable points. By sunset, the men were exhausted, covered in grease and sweat, but their eyes reflected something new. Ownership. These were no longer simply assigned vehicles. They had become extensions of themselves, understood in an intimate way few modern tankers experienced. As the crews cleaned up, Lieutenant Colonel Rawlins approached Blackwood, who was studying schematics under a work light. Unorthodox methods, Colonel, Rawlins observed. Division would have a fit if they knew we were modifying these tanks beyond regulation specifications. Then I suggest we avoid informing Division. Blackwood didn't look up from his diagrams. What's on your mind, Michael? You didn't come here to state the obvious. Rawlins hesitated. The men are talking. Your training approach has raised questions. Some wonder if we're being prepared for a suicide mission. Now Blackwood did look up, his gaze steady. And what do you think, Colonel? I think you're dying, sir. The words hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. An interesting theory, he said, finally. What evidence supports this diagnosis, Dr. Rawlins? I've seen the medication you take when you think no one's watching. The way you manage pain during physical exertion. The intensity with which you approach this mission as if, Rawlins paused, choosing his words carefully, as if it's your last. Blackwood folded the schematics deliberately, taking his time. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, diagnosed 3 months ago. He met Rawlins's gaze directly. 6 months of life expectancy, give or take. I'd appreciate this information remaining between us. Rawlins absorbed this, his face professional, but eyes betraying shock. Does General Schwarzkopf know? No, and he won't. Not until after Rattlesnake. Sir, with respect, you should be in treatment, not what, Colonel? Blackwood's voice took on an edge. Not serving my country? Not finishing what I started? Not showing these young men that duty transcends personal comfort? He stood, wincing slightly at the movement. The treatment would buy me months at best, and they'd be months spent in hospitals, not where I belong. Rawlins stepped closer, lowering his voice. The men deserve to know who they're following. They know who they're following, Michael. A soldier. Same as them. My personal circumstances are irrelevant to the mission. Blackwood gathered his papers. We all die, Colonel. The only variable is whether we do so with purpose. Before Rawlins could respond, Sergeant Jefferson approached, saluting crisply. Sir, the modifications to Tank 3 are complete. We've managed to reduce its weight by nearly 2 tons without compromising structural integrity. Excellent work, Sergeant. Blackwood returned the salute. We'll test the mobility improvements at first light. As Jefferson departed, Blackwood turned back to Rawlins. Your concerns are noted, Colonel, But my condition changes nothing about our objectives or methods. Are we clear? After a long moment, Rollins nodded. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now, I believe you have a night navigation exercise to oversee. Blackwood's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Watching Rollins walk away, Blackwood felt a curious lightness. Someone else now carried knowledge of his secret. It should have felt like vulnerability, but instead it was almost relief, as if the burden had been incrementally lessened by being shared. He returned to his quarters, where the latest satellite imagery of the Mojave exercise area awaited his review. The pain was intensifying as the day's medication wore off, but he pushed through, marking key terrain features that could provide cover or vantage points. In the quiet of his small room, Blackwood allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Was Rollins right? Was he pushing these men toward a mission with impossible odds for his own redemption? To settle an old score with Harrison before cancer claimed him? The question lingered uncomfortably, but as he studied the terrain maps, another thought emerged with clarity. Win or lose, these men deserved his best, his experience, his complete focus. If that meant driving himself beyond medical recommendation, so be it. He reached for the pill bottle, hesitating only briefly before taking his nightly dose. Tomorrow would bring another day of preparation, another step closer to Rattlesnake, another opportunity to forge something remarkable from what others had discarded. The Desert Wolves weren't just fighting for survival as a battalion. They were fighting to prove that in warfare, the human element remained paramount, that courage, ingenuity, and determination could still overcome technological advantage. It was a lesson worth teaching, even if it proved to be Blackwood's last. Chapter 5, Mojave Aflame. The Mojave Desert stretched before them like an alien landscape, vast and unforgiving under the merciless sun. Heat waves rippled across the horizon, distorting vision and judgment alike. From his position atop a rocky outcrop, Colonel Blackwood surveyed the terrain through high-powered binoculars, the metal hot against his skin despite the early hour. 12 days had passed like a fever dream. Training, planning, modifying their equipment. Now the moment of truth had arrived. Operation Rattlesnake had begun at dawn, with the Desert Wolves and Red Eagles deploying to opposite ends of a 50-square-mile exercise area. The rules were simple but brutal. Force-on-force engagement over 72 hours. Laser targeting systems simulating actual combat. When a tank received a killing blow, onboard computers would shut down its systems, rendering it immobile until recovery teams arrived. The objective? Eliminate the opposing force or capture their headquarters. Blackwood lowered the binoculars, feeling the familiar ache in his gut intensifying. The morning medication was wearing off faster now, the cancer accelerating its invasion of his body. He pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the mission. Any sign of enemy movement? Rollins asked, climbing up beside him. Nothing yet. They're being cautious. Blackwood pointed to a distant ridge line. Harrison will establish observation posts there and there. Standard doctrine. He'll want complete situational awareness before committing his forces. And meanwhile, we've gone dark. Rollins nodded appreciatively. Radio silence except for emergency channels. Minimal movement during daylight, using terrain to mask our positions. The first rule of fighting a superior force: don't fight on their terms. Blackwood handed Rollins the binoculars. They expect us to use conventional armored tactics to meet force with force. That's a losing proposition. So we become the Desert Wolf. Hunt, hide, strike where they're vulnerable. Precisely. Blackwood unfolded a map, weighing its corners with small stones. We've divided our forces into 4 elements: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, each with a specific role in the overall strategy. The plan was unconventional by any standard. Rather than concentrating their limited armor for maximum firepower, Blackwood had dispersed them across the exercise area. 4 tanks would act as decoys, conducting noisy movements to draw attention. 4 would establish ambush positions in narrow passes. 4 would conduct deep reconnaissance, identifying enemy supply lines and communication nodes. And his special platoon, the 4 tanks he had personally trained, would be held in reserve for a specific mission. It's a high-risk approach, Rollins observed. If Harrison detects the pattern, he could isolate and destroy each element before they can support each other. Risk is relative at Karanim. When facing overwhelming odds, conventional tactics guarantee defeat. Our only option is to change the nature of the engagement. Blackwood traced a route on the map. The key is to make Harrison think he understands our strategy, to let him see the decoys, to let him engage our ambush forces. While his attention is focused there, we strike at his vulnerabilities, Rollins finished. Fuel depots, command posts, recovery vehicles. Target the support structure, and even the most advanced weapon becomes a very expensive paperweight. Blackwood folded the map. It's time. Send the execute order to all elements. As Rollins moved to the communications jeep, Blackwood took a moment to survey the men preparing for movement below. Their faces showed tension, certainly, but also determination. In 12 days, they had transformed from a demoralized unit awaiting disbandment into something else entirely. Something with purpose, with pride. Whether that transformation would be enough remained to be seen. The first contact came shortly after noon. Alpha Element, the decoy force, reported Abrams tanks advancing from the northeast. As planned, they made a show of hasty defensive preparations, then conducted a fighting withdrawal, leading the pursuing Abrams toward the prepared ambush positions of Bravo Element. From the command post established in a concealed canyon, Blackwood monitored communications, visualizing the battle unfolding across the desert. The M60s of Bravo Element held their fire until the Abrams were within 800 meters, then unleashed a coordinated volley from concealed defilade positions. The laser targeting systems registered 3 Abrams as destroyed with 2 more damaged. First blood to the Desert Wolves, Rollins reported, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. Harrison won't be pleased. He's just testing our dispositions, Blackwood cautioned. This was reconnaissance in force, not his main attack. He sacrificed those tanks to gain information. Still, 5 Abrams for no losses on our side, that's a victory. It's the beginning of a chess match, Blackwood corrected. Now Harrison knows we've prepared ambush positions. He'll adapt his tactics accordingly. By nightfall, the picture had evolved. Harrison had split his forces, using one company to maintain pressure on the Desert Wolves' identified positions, while another conducted wide flanking movements. 3 M60s from Charlie Element had been destroyed when they encountered a superior Abrams force during reconnaissance. Under the cover of darkness, Blackwood gathered his command team to reassess the situation. We've lost 3 tanks. Harrison has lost 7. Major Wilson summarized the day's engagements. At this rate, we could achieve rough parity by tomorrow evening. Don't be deceived by the numbers, Blackwood warned. Harrison is probing, learning. He still has 20 tanks operational while we're down to 11, and he's identified our general strategy. Lieutenant Parker pointed to the tactical display. Sir, we've detected increased electronic emissions from this sector. It appears they're setting up a forward command post closer to our positions. Blackwood studied the map, noting the location. That's premature. Harrison should maintain his command element further back, especially given our demonstrated ambush capability. He frowned. Unless it's bait, Rollins concluded. He's creating an apparent vulnerability, hoping we'll commit forces to attack it. Almost certainly. Blackwood nodded. But Harrison's arrogance has always been his weakness. He's so confident in his technological superiority that he takes calculated risks. He tapped the map. This command post will be well defended, but it's also likely to contain his actual tactical operations center. He wouldn't trust subordinates with command decisions. The officers exchanged glances, seeing where Blackwood's thinking led. You want to take the bait, Wilson said, but knowing it's a trap. Every trap has a weakness, Major. The question is whether the potential gain justifies the risk. Blackwood turned to Jefferson, who stood quietly at the edge of the group. Sergeant, your assessment? You've studied the Abrams' defensive capabilities as thoroughly as anyone. Jefferson stepped forward, his face illuminated by the red-filtered tactical lights. The Abrams establishes security through concentric rings, sir. Long-range sensors, then outlying tanks, then close-in defensive positions. Their confidence in their night vision and thermal imaging means they often leave subtle gaps in their coverage, particularly to the rear of their formations. And if we were to approach from multiple angles simultaneously, Jefferson considered this. They'd prioritize the most direct threat, shifting sensors and firepower accordingly. A small element approaching from an unexpected vector might penetrate to within striking distance before detection. Blackwood nodded, decision forming. Here's what we're going to do. Delta Element will conduct a diversionary attack from the north at 0200 hours. Aggressive, noisy, making maximum use of illumination rounds. While Harrison's attention is focused there, our special platoon will approach from the southwest, using that ridgeline to mask our movement. That's extreme risk, sir, Wilson objected. Even if they reach the command post, 4 tanks against whatever defenses Harrison has established. We're not sending them to engage in direct combat, Major. Blackwood outlined his plan, its audacity leaving even Rawlins momentarily speechless. Sir, that borders on irregular warfare, Parker said finally. We're past borders, Lieutenant. We're in survival territory now. Blackwood looked around the table. Questions? When none came, he concluded the briefing. Execute your preparations. We move in 4 hours. As the officers dispersed, Rawlins remained behind. The special platoon mission. You're leading it personally. It wasn't a question, but Blackwood nodded confirmation. Sir, with respect, that's not necessary. Any officer could. No, Michael, they couldn't. This mission requires someone who knows Harrison's psychology, who can anticipate his reactions. Blackwood's voice softened slightly. Besides, you know as well as I do that we don't send men where we won't go ourselves. And if something happens to you, then you assume command and complete the operation according to the established plan. Blackwood placed a hand on Rawlins' shoulder. You're ready for this, Colonel. You've been ready since the day I arrived. The sincerity in his voice left no room for argument. Rawlins nodded, accepting both the compliment and its implications. I'll have the special platoon prepared for departure at era 1:30. Left alone in the command tent, Blackwood took a moment to compose a brief message on his personal tablet. A letter to Margaret explaining his decisions, expressing his love. He set it to send automatically in 24 hours unless countermanded. A precaution, nothing more. The night air was cool against his face as he stepped outside. Looking up at stars so brilliant, they seemed to press down upon the desert. The vastness of the cosmos had always given Blackwood perspective. Individual lives were brief flashes against eternity. What mattered was not their duration, but their impact. At Oro 130 hours precisely, Blackwood joined his special platoon at the designated rally point. 4 M60 Pattons, engines idling quietly, crews alert and focused. They had removed all unnecessary equipment, reducing weight to increase speed and range. Extra fuel tanks had been strapped to the rear decks. The modifications they had labored over during training were about to be tested. Gentlemen, Blackwood addressed the assembled crews, his voice low, but carrying in the still desert air. Tonight we rewrite the book on armored warfare. Remember your training, trust your instincts, above all, trust each other. He climbed aboard the lead tank, settling into the commander's position with a familiarity born of decades in similar turrets. The interior smelled of oil, sweat, and the particular metallic scent unique to armored vehicles. It smelled like home. Jefferson looked up from the gunner's position. Ready when you are, sir. Driver, advance as planned, radio discipline in effect. The 4 tanks moved out in single file, using terrain features to shield their movement from potential observation. They traveled without lights, relying on night vision devices in the ambient starlight. Their route took them in a wide arc, approaching Harrison's command post from the most difficult and therefore least monitored direction. 2 hours of careful movement brought them to the base of a steep ridge line. Beyond lay their target, a collection of vehicles and temporary structures where Harrison directed his forces. Intelligence from their reconnaissance elements suggested at least 4 Abrams tanks providing security, along with various support vehicles. Blackwood raised his binoculars, studying the layout. The command post was arranged exactly as doctrine prescribed, with concentric rings of security. But there, at the southwestern quadrant, was a small gap in coverage. A drainage culvert running beneath a dirt road provided just enough space for a man to pass. That's our entry point, Blackwood pointed it out to Jefferson. We'll need to cross 200 meters of open ground to reach it. Thermal imaging will pick us up immediately unless we have a distraction. As if on cue, the radio crackled with a brief coded message. Delta Element was in position, ready to launch their diversionary attack. Confirm execution, Blackwood transmitted, then turned to his crew. Prepare for rapid advance, on my command. In the distance, a sudden eruption of light and sound signaled Delta Element's attack. Illumination rounds burst overhead, bathing the northern approach in harsh white light. Machine gun fire and the distinctive boom of tank cannons created a cacophony of simulated battle. Now, Blackwood ordered, maximum speed. The 4 M60s surged forward, engines roaring as they charged across the open ground toward the drainage culvert. Blackwood braced himself against the violent motion, eyes fixed on the command post. For several precious seconds, all security attention seemed focused on the northern attack. Then, inevitably, they were spotted. An Abrams turret swung toward them with the swift precision of hydraulic drives. A moment later, its laser targeting system registered a hit on the last M60 in their formation. Tank 4 is down, Jefferson reported tersely, continuing advance. The remaining 3 tanks increased speed, closing the distance to the culvert. Another laser shot disabled Tank 3 just 50 meters from their objective. But Blackwood's tank and Tank 2 reached the culvert, positioning themselves to provide covering fire. "Dismount," Blackwood ordered, grabbing his equipment bag. "Martinez, Collins, with me. Jefferson, maintain position and be prepared for rapid extraction." The 3 men dropped from the tank, sprinting toward the drainage pipe. Behind them, Tank 2's cannons simulated firing at the approaching Abrams, buying precious seconds. The culvert was narrower than it had appeared through binoculars, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through muddy water. Blackwood led the way, ignoring the pain shooting through his abdomen as he pulled himself forward. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of their red-filtered flashlights. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, they emerged on the other side, now inside the innermost security perimeter of Harrison's command post. Keeping low, they moved toward the central command vehicle, a modified Humvee surrounded by communications equipment. "Set the charges exactly as rehearsed," Blackwood whispered. 90-second delay, then back to the extraction point. While Martinez stood guard, Blackwood and Collins attached small devices to specific points on the communications array. These weren't explosive charges, but rather sophisticated electronic warfare modules that would, when activated, broadcast signals simulating a massive electromagnetic pulse. Every computer system, every targeting mechanism, every digital control within range would temporarily shut down, including those in the Abrams tanks. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. As they prepared to withdraw, a figure emerged from the command vehicle directly in front of them. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, easily recognizable despite the low light. "Hold position," Blackwood hissed, pulling his men into the shadows. Harrison paused as if sensing something amiss. He looked directly toward their position, eyes narrowing. For a heart-stopping moment, Blackwood thought they had been discovered. Then Harrison's radio crackled with an urgent message from the northern perimeter, and he turned away, barking orders as he strode toward a waiting vehicle. "Move," Blackwood ordered as soon as Harrison was out of sight. "Back to the culvert." They retraced their steps, now hearing the heightened activity of a command post responding to multiple threats. Alarms were sounding as they reached the drainage pipe and began their crawl back toward the waiting tanks. The pain in Blackwood's abdomen had intensified to a burning agony that threatened to double him over. But he pushed forward, drawing on decades of discipline to compartmentalize the sensation. The mission came first, always. They emerged from this culvert to find Jefferson holding position against increasing pressure. Tank 2 had been destroyed, its systems shut down by multiple simulated hits. 30 seconds to charge activation, Blackwood announced, climbing aboard with effort that he concealed from his men. "Driver, prepare for immediate withdrawal along Route Charlie." As Collins gunned the engine, Blackwood allowed himself a moment to imagine the chaos about to unfold behind them. The electronic warfare modules would activate, broadcasting signals that would cause every digital system in Harrison's command post to crash simultaneously. Communications, targeting computers, position tracking, all would fail. In the brief window of confusion that followed, the Desert Wolves' remaining elements would launch coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Not to destroy the Abrams tanks, which would be impossible in direct engagement, but to capture the now vulnerable command post itself. It was a gamble of monumental proportions, a violation of conventional armored doctrine, a tactic that would never be taught at the War College. But as the M60 roars away into the desert night, Blackwood felt the same certainty he had experienced in countless engagements across 4 decades of service. In warfare, audacity, properly applied, could overcome even the most daunting material disadvantage. Behind them, Harrison's orderly command post erupted into confusion as every electronic system simultaneously failed. And in that moment of darkness and disorientation, the Desert Wolves closed in for the kill. Chapter 6. Day of Decision. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as Colonel Blackwood surveyed the aftermath of the night's operation. From his vantage point on a rocky outcropping, the command post that had been Harrison's nerve center now flew the Desert Wolves' standard. M60 tanks held defensive positions around its perimeter, while confused Abrams crews attempted to restore functionality to their sophisticated but temporarily crippled systems. Rawlins climbed up beside him, fatigue evident in his movements, but satisfaction in his eyes. "Sir, final assessment. We've captured the enemy command post, neutralized their communications network, and isolated 8 Abrams tanks from the main force. Exercise controllers have officially declared Phase 1 objectives complete." Blackwood nodded, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. "And our losses?" 7 M60s disabled, 3 with mechanical failures, 4 to enemy action. Rawlins consulted his tablet. "That leaves us with 7 operational tanks for Phase 2, against 12 functioning Abrams still in the field." Blackwood calculated the odds. Better than when we started, at least. The operation had succeeded beyond reasonable expectation. The electronic warfare modules had performed exactly as designed, creating a 90-second window of complete systems failure throughout Harrison's command area. In that brief interval, the Desert Wolves had swarmed the position from multiple directions, capturing the command staff and establishing defensive positions before the Abrams tanks could reorganize. Harrison himself had been declared a casualty of the operation, killed in the initial assault when an M60 targeted his command vehicle. Exercise rules required him to relinquish control to his executive officer for the remainder of Rattlesnake. "Harrison is requesting a meeting," Rawlins said, handing Blackwood a message form, "ostensibly to discuss recovery operations for disabled vehicles, but really to see the face of the man who outmaneuvered him." Blackwood finished. "Arrange it for 1100 hours, neutral ground at the exercise controller's position." As Rawlins departed to make the arrangements, Blackwood took a moment to assess his physical condition. The previous night's exertion had cost him dearly. The pain was now a constant companion, requiring double his usual medication dosage to remain functional. His body was sending clear signals that it was approaching its limits. But they weren't finished yet. Phase 2 of Rattlesnake would test whether the Desert Wolves could consolidate their gains against a still numerically superior force. The remaining Abrams tanks would regroup, adapt to the loss of central command, and counterattack. The next 24 hours would determine whether their initial success had been a fluke or a fundamental validation of Blackwood's approach. At 1100 hours precisely, a staff car delivered Blackwood to the exercise controller's station, a collection of tents and communications equipment on neutral ground between the opposing forces. Harrison waited there, his normally immaculate uniform showing signs of hasty preparation. His face, always lean and angular, now bore the additional sharpness of recent defeat. "Colonel Blackwood," Harrison's greeting was professional but cold. "Congratulations on your unorthodox tactics last night." "Lieutenant Colonel Harrison," Blackwood returned the salute crisply. "Thank you for meeting under these circumstances." The two men moved to a map table set up beneath a canopy, maintaining the pretense that this was about recovery coordination. Around them, exercise controllers monitored the ongoing operations, studiously avoiding obvious observation of the two commanders. "Electronic warfare modules," Harrison said without preamble, keeping his voice low. "Designed to simulate EMP effects. Not standard issue for a tank battalion. One might wonder how you acquired such specialized equipment." Blackwood smiled slightly. "One might also wonder why the Red Eagle's tanks lacked basic EMP hardening protocols, despite regulations requiring them." Harrison's jaw tightened. "You circumvented the spirit of the exercise parameters." "I adapted to battlefield conditions using available resources." Blackwood met Harrison's gaze steadily. "Just as I did in Vietnam when I refused your request for air support on that village." The mention of their shared history hung between them like a live grenade. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Still fighting old battles, Sam? I would have thought terminal cancer might give you a different perspective." The revelation that Harrison knew about his condition momentarily startled Blackwood, but he maintained his composure. "My perspective is exactly what it's always been, James. That our duty is to win through skill and judgment, not merely overwhelming firepower. That we protect the innocent, even when doing so complicates our mission." "Noble sentiments," Harrison's voice dripped with sarcasm. "But this isn't Vietnam. This is a controlled exercise designed to evaluate modern armored warfare doctrine. Your guerrilla tactics make for an interesting footnote, but they don't change the fundamental equation. The M60 is obsolete. The men who cling to its era are equally so." Blackwood absorbed the intended insult without visible reaction. "Is that what this was about? Providing a decisive demonstration of the old guard's irrelevance?" This is about the future of American armored warfare, Harrison replied. Resources are limited. Decisions must be made about which programs continue and which end. General Campbell needed clear results to present to the Appropriations Committee, and you were happy to provide those results by setting up a massacre. Harrison shrugged. It's simply evolution, Sam. The strong replace the weak. The modern supersedes the outdated. Except we didn't follow your script, did we? Blackwood leaned forward slightly. We adapted. We innovated. We proved that men with inferior equipment but superior training and tactics can still prevail. You've won a single engagement through trickery and violation of standard protocols. Harrison dismissed the accomplishment with a wave of his hand. Phase 2 begins in 6 hours. My remaining force still outnumbers yours, and they won't be caught unprepared again. By this time tomorrow, the exercise results will reflect the inevitable outcome. Perhaps, Blackwood acknowledged, but the observers have seen something they didn't expect. The Pentagon representatives, the foreign military attachés, the congressional staffers, they've seen that technology alone doesn't determine battlefield outcomes. He gathered his cover, preparing to depart. That's a lesson worth teaching, regardless of tomorrow's result. Harrison's expression hardened. You're dying, Sam. You could have spent your remaining months with your family instead of on this futile crusade. For what? To prove a point about obsolete machines and outdated tactics? Blackwood paused, considering his response carefully. Not about machines, James, about men. About the fact that the human element remains the decisive factor in warfare. Something you never understood, not in Vietnam, not now. He turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at his former protege. You know what the difference is between us? You see tanks as weapons platforms. I see them as vessels for human courage and ingenuity. That's why you'll win battles, but never understand warfare. Without waiting for a response, Blackwood departed, leaving Harrison staring after him with a mixture of anger and unwilling respect. Back at the Desert Wolves' position, Blackwood gathered his officers for Phase 2 planning. The captured command post had yielded valuable intelligence about the remaining Abrams force disposition and intended rally points. This information, combined with their own reduced but still effective strength, gave them a fighting chance against the odds. They'll expect us to fortify this position, Blackwood indicated the captured command post, to dig in and attempt to hold what we've gained against their superior firepower. That would be the conventional approach, Rawlins agreed. Use the defensive advantage to offset their numerical superiority. And it would fail, Blackwood stated flatly. We don't have the resources for a static defense against 12 Abrams. We'd be overwhelmed within hours. He outlined an alternative strategy that had the officers exchanging surprised glances. Sir, you're suggesting we abandon the position we just captured? Major Wilson looked incredulous. After all the risk we took to seize it? I'm suggesting we use their expectations against them, Major. Blackwood traced routes on the tactical map. They believe we'll defend this ground. They'll prepare for that fight, concentrate their forces accordingly. Instead, we'll leave a minimal presence here while our main force strikes at their assembly areas. The audacity of the plan silenced objections. Rather than defending their gains, they would go on the offensive again, targeting the Abrams as they concentrated for what they believed would be an assault on a fixed position. It's high risk, Rawlins summarized. If they detect our movement and change their plans, we could find ourselves caught in the open, outgunned and without fallback positions. Every worthwhile military action balances risk against reward, Blackwood responded. But consider the psychological impact. Harrison's replacement commander is working from a conventional playbook. He expects certain responses based on doctrine and precedent. When we violate those expectations repeatedly, we create hesitation, uncertainty. Jefferson, included in the planning session due to his critical role in the special platoon, nodded his agreement. The Abrams crews will be second-guessing their systems after last night's EMP event. Their confidence in their technological advantage has been shaken. Exactly. Blackwood looked around the table. Gentlemen, we've proven we can bloody their nose. Now we need to show we can stand toe-to-toe and prevail in direct engagement, not through technological superiority, but through better tactics, better coordination, and better understanding of the battle space. The officers departed to prepare their units, leaving Blackwood alone with Rawlins. How are you holding up, sir? Rawlins asked quietly once the others were gone. Blackwood considered deflecting the question, then decided against it. I've been better. The medication is becoming less effective. He grimaced slightly. But I'm functional. That's what matters. With respect, sir, there's a difference between functional and effective. The men need you at your best for phase 2. The men need leadership, Colonel. If I become unable to provide that, you're fully prepared to take command. Blackwood placed a hand on Rollins' shoulder. But until that moment arrives, I remain exactly where I belong. The sun was setting when the Desert Wolves began their stealthy withdrawal from the captured command post. Leaving behind 2 tanks and support vehicles to maintain the appearance of a defended position, the remaining 5 M60s moved out in carefully planned routes toward the Abrams assembly areas identified by their intelligence. Blackwood rode in Jefferson's tank, now serving as an observer rather than commander. His physical condition had deteriorated to the point where he acknowledged privately that direct command might compromise the mission. Instead, he had placed tactical control in the hands of his company officers while maintaining strategic oversight. The desert night wrapped around them like a protective cloak. The M60's engines muffled to reduce detection. They moved slowly, deliberately, maintaining communication through brief, encoded transmissions that would be difficult for enemy signals intelligence to locate or decipher. 3 hours into their movement, the forward element reported visual contact with the Abrams assembly area. True to prediction, the Red Eagles had concentrated their forces for an assault on the captured command post, establishing a tactical staging area in a natural depression that offered concealment from direct observation. From his position in the command tank, Blackwood studied the enemy disposition through night vision equipment. 11 Abrams tanks arranged in textbook formation, support vehicles clustered in the center. Sentries posted but oriented primarily toward the direction of the expected advance. Classic preparation for a dawn attack, Rollins observed, voice low despite the unlikelihood of being overheard. They'll move out at first light expecting to overwhelm our defenses through speed and shock. Blackwood nodded. And instead we'll disrupt their assembly while they're still preparing. Jefferson signaled the other elements. Execute according to plan at 3:30 hours. The synchronized attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. M60 tanks, positioned on the surrounding high ground, opened fire with their laser targeting systems, simulating the 105mm main guns. In the first 30 seconds of the engagement, before the Abrams crews could respond effectively, 4 of their number registered critical hits that would have been catastrophic in actual combat. The remaining Abrams reacted with professional efficiency, orienting toward the threat and returning fire. But the M60s, following Blackwood's unorthodox tactics, fired and immediately changed position, presenting moving targets that complicated the Abrams targeting solutions. For 20 minutes, the battle raged across the desert floor. The M60s used their knowledge of the terrain to maximum advantage, appearing briefly to fire, then disappearing behind ridge lines or into shallow depressions. The Abrams, designed for frontal engagement on open ground, found themselves in a swirling, chaotic fight for which their training had not prepared them. By the time the exercise controllers called a halt to assess casualties, the results were stunning. 8 Abrams had been declared combat ineffective. 3 Desert Wolves M60s had suffered the same fate, leaving 2 operational tanks against 4 Abrams. We've achieved virtual parity, Rollins reported, undisguised satisfaction in his voice. Exercise controllers are requesting both forces to hold position while they evaluate the engagement results. Blackwood leaned back in the commander's seat, allowing himself a moment of genuine pride. Against all reasonable expectation, the Desert Wolves had fought the supposedly superior force to a near standstill. They had proven that tactical innovation, thorough terrain knowledge, and crew coordination could indeed offset technological advantage. But as the adrenaline of combat faded, the pain reasserted itself with savage intensity. Blackwood found himself struggling to maintain consciousness, the edges of his vision darkening alarmingly. With effort that he concealed from those around him, he kept his composure, issuing necessary orders while fighting an increasingly difficult battle within his own body. Dawn broke over a transformed battlefield. Exercise controllers moved among the scattered vehicles, tallying results and interviewing crew members about the engagement. Senior observers from the Pentagon, Congress, and foreign militaries conferred in small groups, their animated discussions suggesting the unexpected outcome had generated significant interest. Blackwood, having taken a dangerous but necessary additional dose of pain medication, stood with his officers as the exercise director approached. Colonel Frank Miller, a career armor officer with a reputation for absolute impartiality, carried a clipboard and an unreadable expression. Colonel Blackwood, Miller began formally, preliminary assessment indicates that your force has achieved objectives beyond the established parameters for success. The capture of the enemy command post, followed by the neutralization of two-thirds of their armored strength, represents an outcome that statistical models predicted as virtually impossible. Blackwood nodded acknowledgement, letting Miller continue. However, certain tactical decisions made during the course of the exercise raised questions about adherence to established doctrine and protocols. Miller consulted his clipboard. The use of electronic warfare systems not organic to an armored battalion. The employment of irregular warfare tactics inconsistent with conventional armored engagement. The abandonment of a strategically valuable position in favor of a high-risk offensive operation. With respect, Colonel, Blackwood responded, his voice steady despite his physical distress. Established doctrine assumes rough parity in capabilities and numbers. When facing overwhelming disadvantage, innovation becomes a necessity, not a choice. Miller looked up from his notes, a hint of a smile breaking through his professional demeanor, a perspective that several of our observers have noted with considerable interest. He glanced toward a group of senior officers watching from nearby. General Schwarzkopf, in particular, has expressed his admiration for your adaptability. Blackwood followed Miller's gaze, surprised to see Norman Schwarzkopf among the observers. The general raised a hand in greeting, approval evident in his expression. The final phase of Operation Rattlesnake will commence at 1200 hours, Miller continued. Your remaining forces against their 4 operational Abrams. Objective, control of the central ridgeline. He lowered his voice slightly. Between us, Colonel, you've already accomplished what many considered impossible. Whatever happens in Phase 3, the Desert Wolves have made their point emphatically. As Miller departed, Rawlins moved closer to Blackwood, concern evident on his face. Sir, you need medical attention. Your color is gray and you're having difficulty standing upright. After Phase 3, Curtin, Blackwood insisted, we finish what we started. With respect, sir, you've proven your point. The battalion's future is secure. There's no need to risk your health further. Blackwood turned to face his executive officer. Officer, his voice low but intense. This was never just about saving the battalion, Michael. It was about preserving a philosophy of warfare, the understanding that men matter more than machines, that courage and innovation remain the decisive factors on any battlefield. He straightened with visible effort. We complete the mission. That's non-negotiable. Rawlins recognized the futility of further argument. Yes, sir, I'll prepare the final briefing for Phase 3. As his officers moved away to prepare their remaining forces, Blackwood took a moment to compose himself. The pain was becoming unmanageable, even with medication. Phase 3 would likely be his last military operation. The knowledge brought not sadness, but a sense of completion, of having come full circle from those early days as a young officer in Korea to this final stand in the Mojave. Harrison approached, his face a study in controlled emotion. Congratulations, Sam. You've made quite an impression on the observers. James, Blackwood acknowledged him with a nod. I thought you were removed from command after Phase 1. For the exercise, yes, but I'm still battalion commander of the Red Eagles. Harrison glanced toward the observers. You know this doesn't change the bigger picture. The M60 is still bound for retirement. The age of the Abrams is here, regardless of one exercise outcome. I'm well aware, Blackwood replied, but perhaps your crews will approach their technological advantage with a healthier respect for its limitations, with the understanding that sensors can be fooled, systems can fail, and when they do, it's the human element that determines survival. Harrison studied him for a moment, professional assessment temporarily overriding personal animosity. You're not well, Sam. You should withdraw from Phase 3. Let your XO handle it. Concerned for my health suddenly, James? I'm touched. Concerned for the integrity of the exercise, Harrison corrected. If you collapse during operations, it creates complications for everyone. Blackwood smiled thinly. I'll try to ensure my inevitable demise occurs at a convenient time for the training schedule. The sarcasm wasn't lost on Harrison. He shook his head slightly. Always the stubborn one. That's what got you passed over for promotion after Vietnam. Not my testimony, but your refusal to acknowledge realities that didn't fit your worldview. Perhaps, Blackwood conceded. Or perhaps some principles are worth career sacrifice, worth even more than that. He turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. If you'll excuse me, I have a final phase to prepare for. As Harrison departed, Blackwood allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Their paths had diverged so dramatically from those early days in Vietnam. Harrison embracing technology and firepower as the solution to every tactical problem. Blackwood maintaining his belief in the primacy of the human element, of judgment and moral clarity in command decisions. Now, as both their careers approached their conclusion, albeit in vastly different ways, Blackwood found himself without rancor. Harrison was a product of his generation and training, just as Blackwood was of his. The Desert Wolves' performance in Rattlesnake wouldn't change the inevitable march of military technology, but it might preserve something equally valuable: the understanding that the operator would always matter more than the equipment. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Blackwood gathered his remaining crews for the final briefing. Phase 3 would be straightforward: a direct engagement for control of the central ridgeline. No subterfuge this time, no elaborate maneuvers. A test of crew against crew, skill against technology. Looking at the faces before him, Blackwood saw not just soldiers but the embodiment of a tradition stretching back to the first armored engagements of the Great War. Men who formed symbiotic relationships with their machines, who understood that steel and firepower were merely tools that required human courage and judgment to be effective. Whatever the outcome of Phase 3, that tradition would continue. The Desert Wolves had ensured it through their performance against impossible odds. They had reminded the observers, and perhaps the Army itself, that warfare remained fundamentally a human endeavor, regardless of technological evolution. For Blackwood, that knowledge was enough. His legacy secured not in personal glory, but in the continuation of principles he had spent a lifetime defending. As the crews moved to their vehicles for the final engagement, he took a moment to savor the desert air, the camaraderie of soldiers preparing for battle, the weight of command that had defined his existence for 4 decades. One last dance indeed, and whatever its outcome, Samuel Iron Sam Blackwood would face it as he had faced every challenge throughout his remarkable career, with unwavering courage, tactical brilliance, and absolute fidelity to his convictions. The Desert Wolves moved out toward their final objective, their commander leading from the front despite the cancer consuming his body. Before them lay not just the central ridgeline, but the validation of everything they represented, the eternal truth that in warfare, the human spirit remained the ultimate weapon, more potent than any technology, more decisive than any material advantage. It was a lesson worth teaching, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. The central ridgeline of the Mojave exercise area rose from the desert floor like the spine of some prehistoric beast, jagged and imposing against the morning sky. From his position in the command tank, Colonel Samuel Blackwood studied the terrain through binoculars, identifying potential approach routes, firing positions, and danger areas. Despite the medication coursing through his system, the pain remained a constant presence, a fire burning in his core that no drug could fully extinguish. "Final phase begins in 30 minutes, sir," Rawlins reported, climbing onto the tank. "Our 2 operational M60s against their 4 Abrams. Exercise controllers have established control of the ridge as the objective. First force to secure and hold the summit for 20 minutes wins." Blackwood lowered the binoculars, turning to face his executive officer. "Status of the crews?" "Ready and motivated. Despite the odds, morale is extraordinarily high." Rawlins hesitated. "They're fighting for you now, sir, as much as for the battalion?" The statement caught Blackwood off guard. Throughout his career, he had emphasized mission over personality, unit over individual. The notion that these men would risk themselves for him personally was uncomfortable. "They're fighting for what we represent, Colonel," he corrected gently. "The principle that skill and courage can overcome material disadvantage, that the human element remains decisive in warfare." Rawlins acknowledged this with a nod, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Jefferson and his crew are preparing your tank now. Martinez has a minor hand injury from Phase 2, but he's cleared to continue as loader." "I won't be commanding the tank for Phase 3, Blackwood said, his decision made. "You'll take tactical control of both vehicles. I'll observe and advise from the command post." Surprise registered on Rawlins' face. "Sir?" "My condition has deteriorated overnight," Blackwood admitted, keeping his voice matter-of-fact. "I would be a liability in direct command, and we can't afford liabilities against 4 Abrams. The admission cost him. Throughout his career, Blackwood had never voluntarily stepped back from frontline leadership. But the calculus was simple. His physical limitations could compromise the mission, and the mission came before personal pride. "I understand, sir," Rollins said after a moment. "What's your assessment of our approach?" Grateful for the professional pivot, Blackwood turned back to the tactical situation. The ridge offers 3 potential access routes. The eastern approach provides the most cover, but the steepest climb. The western approach is gentler but more exposed. The central approach splits the difference in terms of difficulty and exposure. He pointed to each as he spoke, Rollins following his analysis carefully. "Harrison's replacement commander will expect us to take the eastern route, using terrain to mask our approach. He'll position at least 2 Abrams to cover that avenue." Blackwood's finger traced the map. "I recommend splitting our forces. One tank takes the expected eastern approach, drawing their attention and fire. The second uses the central route, timing its advance to exploit any gap in their coverage." Rollins studied the plan, understanding immediately. A feint and strike, high risk for the decoy tank. "Calculated risk," Blackwood corrected. "The eastern approach offers numerous defilade positions. A well-trained crew can use those to break contact if the situation becomes untenable." For the next 20 minutes, they refined the approach, identifying exact routes, rally points, and contingencies. As they concluded, Rollins turned to his commander with a question that transcended the immediate tactical situation. "Sir, when this is over, regardless of outcome, what happens to the Desert Wolves?" Blackwood considered this. "That decision lies with higher command, not with us. But we've demonstrated the battalion's value, its capacity to adapt, to innovate, to overcome. Whatever the future holds for the M60 platform itself, the men who crew it have proven their worth beyond question." "And you, sir, after Rattlesnake?" The direct question caught Blackwood unprepared. He had avoided thinking beyond the exercise, beyond this final mission. His medical prognosis left little room for long-term planning. "I'll be retiring as scheduled," he said finally. "Margaret has waited long enough for her fishing partner." Both men recognized the gentle fiction for what it was. Blackwood's remaining time would be measured in months, perhaps weeks, not the years of peaceful retirement they pretended lay ahead. "It's been an honor, Sir," Rollins said simply, extending his hand. "Whatever happens in Phase 3, Blackwood took the offered hand, noting the strength in the younger officer's grip. "The honor has been mine, Colonel. Now go make history." As Rollins departed to prepare the cruise, Blackwood allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. In his nearly 4 decades of service, he had commanded men in Korea, Vietnam, Germany, and the Gulf. He had seen the evolution of warfare from the primitive conditions of the Korean winter to the technological battlefield of Desert Storm. Throughout it all, one truth had remained constant. The decisive factor was never the weapon, but the warrior. Not the tank, but the tanker. That was the legacy he hoped to leave. Not personal glory or individual recognition, but the enduring understanding that human courage, skill, and judgment would always matter more than technological advantage. The pain surged again, doubling him over momentarily when no one was watching. He straightened with effort, forcing his breathing to normalize. There would be time for weakness later. Now his men needed him focused and composed, regardless of the fire burning within. The command post for Phase 3 had been established on a small rise offering clear views of the contested ridgeline. As the start time approached, Blackwood positioned himself beside the exercise controllers, radio in hand to maintain communication with his forces. Through high-powered optics, he could see the Abrams tanks taking up positions around the ridge, exactly as he had predicted. 2 covering the eastern approach, 1 on the western, 1 held in reserve near the summit. Their positioning reflected standard doctrine for defending elevated terrain against an inferior force. "Desert Wolf actual, this is command," Blackwood transmitted. "Enemy disposition as expected. Confirm execution of planned maneuver." "Command, this is actual," Rollins replied, his voice calm despite the imminent engagement. "Confirmed. Wolf 1 will initiate in 2 minutes. Wolf 2 positioned for follow-up." Blackwood checked his watch, then surveyed the battlefield once more. Despite the overwhelming odds, he felt an unexpected sense of peace. Win or lose, the Desert Wolves had already achieved what many had deemed impossible. They had transformed from a demoralized unit on the verge of disbandment into a cohesive fighting force that had fought the Army's premier tank battalion to a near standstill. Phase 3 commences now, announced the chief exercise controller, his voice carrying to observers gathered around the command post. Among them, Blackwood noted General Schwarzkopf and several congressional representatives, their attention fixed on the unfolding drama. Almost immediately, Wolf 1, the eastern approach tank commanded by Jefferson, began its advance. Moving from cover to cover, using terrain features to mask its progress, the M60 presented a challenging target even for the sophisticated Abrams fire control systems. The Abrams responded predictably, both Eastern Guardians orienting toward the perceived threat. Within minutes, a furious exchange of simulated fire erupted, laser targeting systems registering hits and misses that would have been catastrophic cannon rounds in actual combat. Jefferson's crew demonstrated the skill Blackwood had recognized during his selection process. They used their knowledge of the M60's capabilities to maximum advantage, exposing the tank only long enough to fire before returning to cover. Their precision gunnery registered a hit on M1 Abrams, damaging but not disabling it. Wolf 2 commencing central approach, came the transmission from Rawlins, exploiting gap as planned. Blackwood watched as the second M60 began its advance up the central route, initially undetected as the Abrams focused on the more obvious threat to the east. The tank moved with surprising speed for its age, Rawlins clearly pushing the engine to its limits to close distance before detection. They made it halfway up the slope before the Abrams commander realized the eastern attack was a feint. The reserve tank on the summit swung its turret toward Rawlins' approaching M60, its laser designator seeking a firing solution. Wolf 2, incoming from your 12 o'clock high, Blackwood transmitted, tension evident despite his efforts at calm. Suggest immediate evasive maneuver. Rawlins acknowledged with action rather than words. The M60 lurched sideways into a shallow depression, the simulated round from the Abrams passing harmlessly overhead. Without pausing, Rawlins continued his advance, now in a zigzag pattern that complicated the enemy targeting solution. On the eastern slope, Jefferson's tank absorbed a direct hit that would have been fatal in actual combat. Exercise rules required them to remain stationary, systems powered down to simulate a destroyed vehicle. Wolf 1 is down, Jefferson reported, the frustration evident in his voice. Good hunting, Wolf 2, make it count. Now only Rawlins' tank remained operational against 4 Abrams, though one had registered moderate damage. The odds, already daunting at the outset, had become nearly insurmountable. Yet Blackwood watched with professional appreciation as Rawlins continued his advance, refusing to concede despite the mathematics of the situation. The M60 crested a small rise, bringing it into direct line of sight with 2 Abrams. In the brief window before they could fire, Rawlins targeted and registered a kill shot on the already damaged tank, reducing the enemy force to 3 operational vehicles. Outstanding shot, Wolf 2, Blackwood transmitted, genuine admiration in his voice. Continue advance to phase line Delta. Prepare for coordinated fire on summit position. The acknowledgement came amid the sound of straining engine and rattling tracks as Rawlins pushed the aging tank to its limits. They had closed 2/3 of the distance to the summit, but the remaining Abrams had now consolidated their positions, creating interlocking fields of fire that would be nearly impossible to penetrate. From the command post, Blackwood could see the tactical situation developing with crystal clarity. Standard doctrine would call for Rawlins to halt his advance, seek cover, and attempt to engage the Abrams sequentially from maximum distance. It would be a losing proposition given the Abrams' superior range and fire control, but it represented the least worst option according to conventional thinking. But conventional thinking was precisely what the Desert Wolves had abandoned throughout Rattlesnake. Wolf 2, this is command, Blackwood transmitted, an idea forming. Recommend execution of maneuver Charlie 6. There was a momentary pause before Rawlins responded, surprise evident even through the radio distortion. Command, confirm maneuver Charlie 6? That's a desperation move. Confirmed, Blackwood replied without hesitation. Sometimes desperation and opportunity look remarkably similar. Charlie 6 was a maneuver they had practiced only twice during their hasty preparation. It involved charging directly at an enemy position at maximum speed, using the psychological shock of a frontal assault to disrupt coordinated defensive fire. It violated every principle of modern armored doctrine, which emphasized standoff engagement using superior targeting systems. But it also exploited a fundamental human reaction that technology couldn't override, the instinctive response to a direct threat. After a brief pause, Rawlins' response came through with grim determination. Wolf 2 executing maneuver Charlie 6, God help us. The M60 lurched forward, abandoning its cautious approach for a full throttle charge directly up the slope toward the summit. Its main gun fired continuously, not with any realistic expectation of hits, but to force the defending Abrams crews to button up inside their turrets, relying on periscopes and digital displays rather than direct vision. The audacity of the maneuver momentarily paralyzed the Abrams response. By the time they began coordinated fire, the M60 had closed half the remaining distance, zigzagging unpredictably to complicate targeting solutions. Laser fire erupted around Rawlins' tank, simulating the deadly 120mm rounds that would have turned a real battlefield into an inferno. Somehow, through skill or providence, the M60 avoided critical hits. Those sensors registered glancing impacts that would have damaged external equipment in actual combat. "He's going to make it," breathed an observer near Blackwood, the professional detachment momentarily abandoned in the face of such audacity. Indeed, it appeared Rawlins might achieve the impossible, reaching the summit through sheer boldness and speed. The M60 crested the final rise, cannon traversing to target the nearest Abrams at point-blank range where the older tank's weapon could penetrate even the advanced armor of its opponent. For a heartbeat, it seemed the gamble had paid off. Rawlins' laser registered a direct hit on one Abrams, the computer immediately simulating a catastrophic kill. 3 down, 1 to go. Then multiple targeting lasers converged on the M60 from different angles. The remaining Abrams, plus one that had circled around from the western approach, caught Rawlins' tank in a crossfire from which there was no escape. "Wolf 2 is down," came Rawlins' transmission, disappointment evident despite his professional tone. "Multiple critical hits. Exercise computers have shut us down," Blackwood acknowledged, maintaining his composure despite the outcome. "Understood, Wolf 2. Outstanding effort." With both Desert Wolves tanks eliminated and the Abrams still controlling the ridge, the exercise controllers declared Phase 3 complete. The Red Eagles had prevailed, as statistics and equipment disparities had always suggested they would. Yet as Blackwood surveyed the gathered observers, he noted that the conversations weren't about the expected outcome, but about the extraordinary performance of the supposedly obsolete force, about the tactics that had brought them to the brink of victory despite overwhelming disadvantage. General Schwarzkopf approached, his expression suggesting he shared this assessment. "One hell of a show, Sam," the general said without preamble. "Your Desert Wolves just rewrote the book on asymmetric armored warfare." "Thank you, sir," Blackwood replied, "but ultimately we failed to secure the objective." "Did you?" Schwarzkopf raised an eyebrow. "Depends on how you define the objective, doesn't it? If it was simply capturing that ridge, then yes, technically you failed. But if it was demonstrating that properly trained crews and legacy equipment can pose a legitimate threat to technologically superior forces," he gestured toward the congressional observers, who were engaged in animated discussion, "I'd say mission accomplished." Before Blackwood could respond, a sharp pain lanced through his abdomen, more intense than any previous episode. He managed to maintain his expression, but Schwarzkopf, ever observant, didn't miss the momentary rigidity in his posture. "Medical tent now," the general ordered quietly. "That's not a suggestion, Colonel." Too weak to argue, Blackwood allowed himself to be escorted to the medical facility established for the exercise. There, away from the eyes of his men and the observers, he finally permitted himself to acknowledge the severity of his condition. The battalion surgeon examined him with increasing concern, eventually administering a stronger painkiller that brought blessed relief but left Blackwood's thoughts slightly unfocused. "Sir, you need immediate hospitalization," the surgeon insisted. "Your condition has progressed significantly. I'm arranging medical evacuation." Blackwood started to object, but was interrupted by the appearance of Rawlins and Jefferson, still in their tanker coveralls, faces streaked with sweat and dust from the morning's exertion. "How bad?" Rawlins asked the surgeon directly, his concern overriding military formality. "Bad enough that I've called for a medevac helicopter," the surgeon replied. "The colonel should have been in a hospital days ago." Jefferson approached Blackwood's bedside, standing at a respectful distance. "Sir, the men are asking about you. The Desert Wolves want to know the status of their commander." Despite the medication clouding his thoughts, Blackwood recognized the importance of the moment. How he handled this transition would define his legacy with the battalion as much as the tactical brilliance he had demonstrated during Rattlesnake. "Tell them," he said finally, his voice weaker than he would have liked, "that their performance has been exemplary." that they have proven beyond any doubt the value of skill and courage over technological advantage, that the future of the Desert Wolves is secure regardless of the platform they eventually operate. Jefferson nodded, absorbing the message. And your status, sir? Blackwood met the sergeant's gaze directly. Tell them their colonel is deploying to a different battlefield, one where the odds are long but not insurmountable. He managed a small smile. After all, we've proven that overwhelming odds can be overcome with the right tactics and sufficient determination. The metaphor wasn't lost on either man. Jefferson straightened, offering a crisp salute that Blackwood returned with as much strength as he could muster. It has been an honor, sir, the sergeant said, emotion briefly cracking his professional demeanor. The honor has been mine, Sergeant. Now go see to your crew. They fought brilliantly today. As Jefferson departed, Rollins moved closer, taking the chair beside Blackwood's bed. The exercise director is preparing his final assessment. Early indications suggest the Desert Wolves will receive a commendation for innovative tactics and exceptional performance against superior forces. Good, Blackwood nodded, the painkillers making it increasingly difficult to focus. That should ensure the battalion's continuation, even as it transitions to new equipment. And Harrison? What about him? He's requested permission to visit you before the medevac arrives. Blackwood considered this unexpected development. His relationship with Harrison had been defined by their Vietnam experience, by fundamentally different approaches to warfare and command. What could possibly be gained from a final confrontation? Yet something in him, perhaps the medication lowering his normal barriers, recognized the opportunity for closure. For both of them. Send him in, Blackwood decided, but stay if you would. Harrison entered moments later, his uniform impeccable despite the desert conditions. He nodded to Rollins but focused immediately on Blackwood. They told me you're being evacuated, he began without preamble. I wanted to see you before you left. Paying final respects, James. Blackwood's tone held more weariness than bitterness. Something like that. Harrison moved closer, studying the man who had once been his mentor. Your Desert Wolves performed unexpectedly well. High praise indeed, Blackwood noted the careful phrasing, coming from the commander of the victorious force. Victory is relative in training exercises, Harrison replied. We secured the objectives, yes, but your tactics have generated significant discussion among the observers. Questions about our reliance on technology, about vulnerabilities we hadn't adequately addressed. Then perhaps Operation Rattlesnake served its purpose for both our units. A moment of silence stretched between them, decades of history and divergent paths hanging in the air. Finally, Harrison spoke again, his voice lower. I've never forgiven you for refusing that airstrike in Vietnam, for questioning my judgment in front of the command staff. The statement, direct and unvarnished, caught even Rollins by surprise. But Blackwood merely nodded, having long understood the root of their professional animosity. And I've never regretted that decision, he replied evenly. 43 civilians lived because of it, because someone was willing to prioritize moral clarity over tactical expediency. Harrison's jaw tightened. There were enemy combatants in that village. Intelligence confirmed it. Perhaps, but the response you requested was disproportionate to the threat, would have resulted in unnecessary civilian casualties. Blackwood held Harrison's gaze. The hardest decisions in command are not about enemy forces, James. They're about restraint, about understanding that how we win matters as much as whether we win. The two men regarded each other across an ideological divide that had defined their careers. Harrison, the technocrat who saw warfare as an engineering problem to be solved through superior firepower and technology. Blackwood, the humanist who understood war as fundamentally a clash of human will and courage, where moral considerations remain paramount regardless of technological evolution. We were never going to see eye to eye on this, Harrison said finally, but for what it's worth, your performance in Rattlesnake was impressive. You've given us things to reconsider in our training approach. Coming from Harrison, it was tantamount to a full concession. Blackwood accepted it with a slight nod. The future belongs to the Abrams and its successors, James. I've never disputed that. But the lessons of the past shouldn't be discarded simply because the technology has evolved. He gestured toward Rollins. The next generation needs to understand both perspectives to be truly effective. Harrison glanced at Rollins, then back to Blackwood. Perhaps. He straightened, professional demeanor returning. I should let you prepare for evacuation. One last thing, James, Blackwood said as Harrison turned to leave. That village in Vietnam. Do you ever wonder what became of it? Of the people we argued about? Harrison paused, his back to the bed. No, he said finally, I don't. I do, Blackwood replied quietly. Every day since. That's the difference between us, in the end. Without turning, Harrison nodded once, then departed, leaving Blackwood and Rawlins alone in the medical tent. 40 years of history in 5 minutes, Rawlins observed after a moment. Some divisions can't be reconciled, Colonel. Only acknowledged. Blackwood shifted, grimacing as pain broke through the medication. But understanding the perspective of those you disagree with remains essential to effective command. Remember that when you're leading the Desert Wolves. The statement confirmed what both already knew. Blackwood would not be returning to command. His battle now lay elsewhere against an enemy no tactical brilliance could overcome. As the sound of an approaching helicopter grew outside, Blackwood reached for Rawlins' hand. Take care of them, Michael. Preserve what we've built these past weeks. The spirit, not just the skill. I will, sir, Rawlins promised, emotion making his voice rough. And I'll make damn sure the lessons of Rattlesnake aren't forgotten, regardless of what tanks we eventually operate. The medical evacuation team entered, preparing to transfer Blackwood to the helicopter. As they worked, he looked once more at Rawlins, passing a baton that transcended mere command. The tank is just steel, Colonel. It's the men inside who matter, who determine victory or defeat. Never let them forget that. With those words, Samuel Iron Sam Blackwood departed the battlefield for the final time, leaving behind a legacy that would endure long after both he and the machines he commanded had passed into history. Chapter 8. The Price of Victory. Walter Reed Army Medical Center stood as a monument to both the cost of service and the nation's commitment to those who paid it. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the private room where Colonel Samuel Blackwood now spent his days. The desert tan of Operation Rattlesnake, already fading from his skin, replaced by the pallor of advancing illness. 2 weeks had passed since his evacuation from the Mojave. 2 weeks of tests, treatments, and consultations that all led to the same conclusion. The cancer had accelerated, spreading beyond the pancreas to his liver and lymph nodes. The prognosis, never optimistic, had shortened from months to weeks. Margaret sat beside his bed, her hand resting lightly on his. 36 years of marriage had given her an intuitive understanding of when to speak and when silence provided the greater comfort. This afternoon, as autumn leaves drifted past the window, she simply maintained her presence, a constant in a rapidly changing landscape. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a nurse. Colonel, you have visitors, a Lieutenant Colonel Rawlins and Sergeant Jefferson. Should I send them in? Blackwood roused himself from the light doze induced by his medication. Yes, please. Margaret squeezed his hand gently. I'll give you some privacy. Military business, I imagine. You can stay, Blackwood assured her. These men are family as much as subordinates. She smiled, understanding the bond forged in their brief but intense shared experience. Even so, I could use some coffee. I'll be back in 20 minutes. As Margaret departed, Rawlins and Jefferson entered, both in service uniforms adorned with the distinctive insignia of the Desert Wolves. They moved with the careful respect of those entering sacred space, aware of Blackwood's condition, but determined not to let it define their interaction. Colonel Sergeant, Blackwood greeted them, struggling slightly to sit more upright. Good of you to come. Sir? Jefferson nodded, his weathered face revealing more emotion than he likely intended. The battalion sends their regards, and their thanks. How are the Desert Wolves faring? Blackwood asked, genuinely concerned despite his condition. Rawlins took the chair Margaret had vacated. Extraordinarily well, sir. The final assessment from Operation Rattlesnake was released last week. Despite our technical defeat in Phase 3, the overall performance was rated exceptional, demonstrating innovative tactics and extraordinary adaptability in adverse conditions. A smile touched Blackwood's pale features. High praise indeed. And the battalion's future? Secured, Rawlins confirmed. General Schwarzkopf personally intervened with the Force Structure Planning Committee. The Desert Wolves will transition to Abrams platforms over the next 18 months, maintaining unit cohesion and identity throughout. And the men? Morale is at an all-time high. The battalion has received dozens of transfer requests from officers and NCOs throughout the Armored Corps. Apparently, word has spread about our performance against the Red Eagles. This brought a more substantial smile to Blackwood's face. From the verge of disbandment to the most requested assignment in the Corps, not bad for 30 days' work. Jefferson, who had remained standing near the foot of the bed, finally spoke. It wasn't the 30 days, sir. It was you, what you taught us about warfare, about the human element being more important than the technology. The lesson was always there, Sergeant, Blackwood replied. In the history of armored warfare, from the first tanks at Cambrai to the present. I merely reminded you of what you already knew, that courage, skill, and tactical innovation remain the decisive factors, regardless of technological evolution. A comfortable silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment. Then Rawlins reached into a leather portfolio he had brought, removing an official document. Sir, I've been instructed to inform you that effective immediately, you are awarded the Legion of Merit for exceptional service during Operation Rattlesnake. The citation specifically mentions your innovative tactical approach and leadership that fundamentally challenged existing armored warfare doctrine and established new paradigms for asymmetric engagement. Blackwood received the certificate with genuine surprise. This is unexpected. Normally, such awards take months to process. General Schwarzkopf expedited it, Rawlins explained, given the circumstances. The unspoken reality hung in the air. There wasn't time for normal procedures. Blackwood appreciated the honesty implicit in the acceleration. No false hopes, no pretense that regular timelines applied to his situation. There's more, Jefferson added, reaching into his breast pocket to withdraw a small box. This isn't official. Not yet, but the men wanted you to have it now. Inside the box lay a custom-made medallion bearing the Desert Wolves insignia, surrounded by the words, Iron Sam's Legacy, Courage over Technology. On the reverse was inscribed, To our commander, who taught us that the human element remains decisive in warfare. Emotion, rarely displayed throughout his stoic career, threatened to overcome Blackwood as he held the medallion. This means more than any official recognition, he said finally, his voice rough. Please convey my deepest thanks to the men. We will, sir, Rawlins promised. And there's something else they should know, something you should tell them. Blackwood looked up questioningly. The exercise parameters for Rattlesnake, Rawlins continued, they weren't just stacked against us by coincidence or oversight. General Campbell deliberately engineered the matchup to demonstrate the obsolescence of the M60 and, by extension, the Desert Wolves. I suspected as much, Blackwood acknowledged. Harrison confirmed it in his way. What you may not know is that Campbell has been relieved of command pending investigation into procurement irregularities. Apparently, he had significant financial interests in defense contractors supplying components for the Abrams program. Interest he failed to disclose while advocating for accelerated retirement of legacy systems. This was genuinely surprising news. How did this come to light? General Schwarzkopf launched an inquiry after Rattlesnake concluded. The timing of the exercise changes, the parameter modifications, the unusual constraints placed on your preparation, they raised red flags. When investigators started pulling threads, Campbell's conflicts of interest unraveled quickly. Blackwood absorbed this, finding a certain symmetry in the outcome. Campbell had attempted to use Rattlesnake to justify his procurement agenda, only to have the Desert Wolves' unexpected performance trigger scrutiny that exposed his ethical lapses. And Harrison, Blackwood asked, was he implicated? No evidence suggests he knew of Campbell's financial interests, Rawlins replied. His motivations appear to have been professional rather than financial. A genuine belief in technological superiority as the path forward. That aligns with the James Harrison I've known for 30 years, Blackwood nodded. Misguided in some respects, but not corrupt. There's a distinction worth maintaining. The conversation turned to more immediate matters of the battalion's training schedule and preparations for the eventual transition to the Abrams platform. Throughout the discussion, Blackwood offered advice and perspective, but increasingly positioned Rawlins as the decision-maker, the torch already passing. As fatigue began to overtake him, evident in the increasing pauses between his responses, Rawlins and Jefferson recognized it was time to depart. We should let you rest, sir, Rawlins said, rising from his chair. Is there anything the battalion can do for you? Anything you need? Blackwood considered this. Just one thing. When the first Abrams arrives for the Desert Wolves, I'd appreciate a photograph, the old giving way to the new as it should. You'll have it, Jefferson promised. And more than that, if you're up to visitors, we'd like to bring some of the younger tankers to meet you, to hear firsthand about Rattlesnake and what it means for their approach to armored warfare. I'd like that, Blackwood agreed, though all three men understood the timeline for such visits was rapidly shrinking. The lessons need to be preserved even as the platforms evolve. The two visitors came to attention, rendering a final salute that Blackwood returned with as much strength as he could muster. No additional words were necessary. Everything that mattered had been said, both in that room and across the sands of the Mojave. After they departed, Margaret returned, immediately noting her husband's increased fatigue. "You should rest," she urged, adjusting his pillows. "The doctor said conservation of energy is important now." "I will," he promised. "But first, I need to record something while my thoughts are clear. Could you bring me the tablet?" She retrieved the device from the bedside table, helping position it as he dictated a brief message. Not a formal military document, but something more personal. His reflections on Operation Rattlesnake, on the desert wolves, on the lessons that transcended the specific exercise. "Throughout my career," he dictated, voice growing stronger as he focused on his message, "I've witnessed the evolution of armored warfare from the rudimentary tactics of Korea to the technological showcase of Desert Storm. Systems have advanced, platforms have improved, capabilities have expanded exponentially. Yet one constant remains. The decisive factor is never the machine but the men who operate it, not the tank but the tanker." He continued, articulating the philosophy that had guided his command approach for 4 decades. The belief that moral courage was as important as physical courage, that tactical innovation could overcome material disadvantage, that the human element would always remain paramount in warfare, regardless of technological evolution. As he concluded, fatigue overcame him, and Margaret gently removed the tablet from his hands. "Enough for now," she insisted. "Rest." Blackwood didn't argue, allowing himself to drift towards sleep, comforted by the knowledge that his legacy was secure, not in decorations or official recognition, but in the men he had commanded, in the lessons they would carry forward, in the understanding that while machines evolved, the fundamental nature of warfare remained anchored in human courage, skill, and judgment. The Desert Wolves would eventually transition to the Abrams platform, as was proper and necessary. But they would bring with them the lessons of Rattlesnake, that technology was a tool, not a solution, that tactical innovation could overcome material disadvantage, that the human element remained decisive. In the days that followed, Blackwood's condition deteriorated rapidly, the cancer advancing despite the best efforts of Walter Reed's medical staff. Yet his mind remained clear, focused on completing his final mission, ensuring that the lessons of his career, culminating in Operation Rattlesnake, were properly documented and preserved. Visitors came regularly, former colleagues from across his lengthy career, members of the Desert Wolves, often traveling considerable distances for brief conversations that meant everything to both parties. General Schwarzkopf himself, setting aside the demands of high command to spend an afternoon reminiscing about shared experiences across multiple conflicts. Even James Harrison appeared one rainy afternoon, their decades-long professional animosity finally giving way to a grudging mutual respect. Their conversation, brief but substantive, acknowledged their divergent paths while recognizing that both perspectives had validity in the complex calculus of modern warfare. Throughout it all, Margaret remained his constant companion, the anchor that had allowed 4 decades of service across 3 continents in countless deployments. She managed the visitor schedule, ensured his comfort, and most importantly, provided the emotional support that even the strongest warriors require in their final battle. On a crisp October morning, with autumn sunlight streaming through his window, Colonel Samuel "Iron Sam" Blackwood completed his final mission. Surrounded by family and with the Desert Wolves battalion colors standing in the corner of his room, he departed with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career. The memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery drew hundreds, despite the rain that fell steadily throughout the ceremony. Military colleagues spanning his entire career stood alongside the current members of the Desert Wolves, all united in honoring a man whose impact transcended the boundaries of rank and generation. As the honor guard folded the flag that had draped his casket, presenting it to Margaret with the solemn precision of a ritual centuries in the making, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rawlins, now commanding officer of the Desert Wolves, reflected on the legacy of Samuel Blackwood. Not the decorations, though they were numerous and well-deserved. Not the official recognition, though it acknowledged a career of exceptional service, but rather the understanding that warfare, regardless of technological evolution, remained fundamentally a human endeavor. That courage, skill, and moral clarity would always matter more than the platform or the weapon system. That the tank was just steel, it was the tanker who mattered. As the ceremony concluded and the assembled mourners began to disperse, Rawlins approached the newly placed headstone. Like thousands of others in Arlington's solemn expanse, it told the simple story of service. Name, rank, dates of birth and death, conflicts in which the deceased had served. But unlike most, this one bore an additional inscription, one that Blackwood himself had requested in his final days. Words that distilled a lifetime of military philosophy into a single, powerful statement. The human element remains decisive. Rawlins placed a hand briefly on the whetstone, making a silent promise to the man who had transformed the Desert Wolves from a unit awaiting disbandment into one of the most respected battalions in the Armored Corps. A promise to preserve the lessons of Operation Rattlesnake, to ensure that even as the Desert Wolves transitioned to the most advanced tanks in the arsenal, they would never forget that technology was merely a tool. That victory was determined not by the sophistication of the machine, but by the courage, skill, and moral clarity of the men who operated it. As he turned to rejoin the battalion, now forming to depart the cemetery, Rawlins noticed something unexpected. James Harrison, standing alone at a distance, rendered nearly anonymous by the rain and the black umbrella he held. Their eyes met briefly across the rows of white headstones, and Harrison offered a solemn nod before turning away. In that simple gesture, Rawlins recognized the final vindication of Blackwood's approach. Even his staunchest professional adversary had come to acknowledge, if not fully embrace, the fundamental truth he had championed throughout his career. That in warfare, as in life, how we conduct ourselves matters as much as what we achieve. That the human element remains decisive. Chapter 9. Steel Legacy. 1 year later, Fort Knox basked in the golden light of a Kentucky summer afternoon. On the parade ground, freshly polished M1 Abrams tanks stood in perfect alignment, their desert tan paint gleaming under the sun. Before them, the men of the Desert Wolves Battalion stood at attention, their formation as precise as their mechanized counterparts. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rawlins surveyed his command with quiet pride. In the 12 months since Operation Rattlesnake, the battalion had completed its transition from the venerable M60 Patton to the state-of-the-art Abrams platform. The process had been challenging, requiring extensive retraining and adaptation, but the core that Blackwood had forged during those intense weeks in the Mojave had remained intact. The ceremony about to begin marked the formal completion of that transition. Distinguished visitors occupied the reviewing stand, including General Norman Schwarzkopf, congressional representatives, and defense industry executives. Among them, in a place of honor, sat Margaret Blackwood, her dignified presence a living connection to the man who had transformed the unit. "Battalion, attention!" Rawlins called, his voice carrying across the parade ground. The assembled soldiers, already at position, somehow managed to stand even straighter, chests out, chins up, eyes forward. Schwarzkopf approached the podium, his imposing presence commanding instant respect. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to celebrate the completion of the Desert Wolves' transition to the M1 Abrams platform. This represents not merely an upgrade in equipment, but the continuation of a proud tradition of armored excellence dating back to the earliest days of the Tank Corps." The general's speech acknowledged the technological superiority of the Abrams, its advanced fire control systems, depleted uranium armor, and gas turbine engine. But he also emphasized the continuity of the human element that operated these machines, the lineage of courage and skill that connected today's tankers with those who had served in Shermans, Pattons, and earlier platforms. Last year, Schwarzkopf continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone, the Desert Wolves, under the command of Colonel Samuel Blackwood, demonstrated that tactical innovation and crew excellence could overcome even the most daunting technological disadvantage. Operation Rattlesnake has since become a case study at the War College, teaching future commanders that while technology evolves, the fundamental principles of armored warfare remain constant. Rawlins noted the attentiveness of his soldiers, particularly the newer transfers who had joined the battalion after Rattlesnake. They had heard the stories, of course, some undoubtedly embellished through repeated tellings, of how an obsolete tank battalion had fought the Army's premier armored unit to a near standstill, of how Colonel Iron Sam Blackwood had proven that the human element remained decisive in warfare, regardless of platform. Today, Schwarzkopf was saying, we not only celebrate the Desert Wolves' future with the Abrams platform, but also honor the legacy of Colonel Blackwood through the establishment of the Blackwood Tactical Innovation Center here at Fort Knox. This announcement generated a ripple of interest even among those who had been briefed beforehand. The center would serve as a think tank for asymmetric armored warfare, challenging conventional doctrine and exploring innovative approaches to modern tank combat. Additionally, the general continued, I am pleased to announce that beginning this year, the Army will present the Blackwood Trophy to the tank crew demonstrating the most innovative tactical approach during the Sullivan Cup competition, regardless of platform or outcome. As the ceremony continued, Rawlins found his thoughts drifting to that intense month under Blackwood's command. The transformation they had undergone, the lessons they had learned, the understanding that while technology provided advantages, it was the human beings operating the equipment who ultimately determined success or failure. Following the formal presentations, the battalion demonstrated their proficiency with the new Abrams tanks, executing precision maneuvers that showcased both the platform's capabilities and the crew's mastery of their equipment. The observers responded with appropriate appreciation, particularly when Sergeant Jefferson's crew executed a complex tactical movement that combined speed, precision gunnery, and coordinated action. Later, as the official guests departed and the battalion began the process of returning equipment to the motor pool, Margaret Blackwood approached Rawlins, her expression suggesting she had more than casual conversation in mind. Colonel, if you have a moment, she began, I have something Sam wanted you to have. He asked me to wait until the transition was complete. She handed him a sealed envelope, Blackwood's distinctive handwriting visible on the front. For Lieutenant Colonel Rawlins, to be opened upon completion of the Desert Wolves' transition to the Abrams platform. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood, Rawlins said, accepting the envelope with careful respect. Would you like me to read it now? She shook her head. He intended it for you alone, Michael. Read it when you have privacy and time to reflect. That evening, after the day's duties were complete and the quiet of his quarters enveloped him, Rawlins opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, written in Blackwood's firm hand during his final days at Walter Reed. Michael, it began without preamble. If you're reading this, the Desert Wolves have completed their transition to the Abrams platform. Congratulations. Change is never easy, particularly for an organization with strong traditions, but it is inevitable and necessary. The Abrams is an extraordinary machine, representing the pinnacle of American engineering and tactical design. Its capabilities far exceed anything we operated during Rattlesnake. But as you assume full responsibility for the battalion's future, remember the central lesson of our time together. The tank is merely steel. It's the men inside who determine victory or defeat. Technology evolves, platforms change, doctrine adapts, but the fundamental nature of warfare remains constant. It is a contest of human will, courage, and judgment. Never allow the Desert Wolves to become so enamored with their technology that they forget this essential truth. In Vietnam, I learned that moral courage often matters more than physical courage, that making the right decision, even when it's unpopular or career-limiting, defines leadership more than any tactical brilliance. Harrison never understood this, believing that warfare could be reduced to a technological equation, a problem solved through superior firepower rather than human judgment. Your challenge now is to balance appreciation for the Abrams capabilities with the understanding that technology is a tool, not a solution, that tactical innovation remains essential even with superior equipment, that the human element remains decisive. The Desert Wolves' future is in good hands, Michael, your hands. Lead them with the understanding that while platforms come and go, the values that define us as soldiers endure. Courage, integrity, judgment, and the willingness to innovate when conventional approaches fail. Iron Sam. Rawlins read the letter twice more, absorbing its message beyond the specific words. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer, though its contents were already committed to memory. The next morning, as the Desert Wolves prepared for another day of training, Rawlins gathered the battalion's officers and senior NCOs for a brief address. Standing before the assembled leadership, with the morning sun glinting off the Abrams tanks behind him, he articulated the philosophy that would guide their approach moving forward. Gentlemen, we operate the most advanced tank in the world, he began. Its capabilities far exceed anything in our previous experience. But as we master this platform, we must never forget the lesson Colonel Blackwood taught us during Operation Rattlesnake. Technology is merely a tool. It's the human beings operating the equipment who determine success or failure. He looked across the faces before him, seeing both veterans of Rattlesnake and newer additions to the battalion, all united by their identity as Desert Wolves, by the legacy they had inherited. "We will become the most proficient Abrams battalion in the Armored Corps," Rawlins continued. "We will master every system, every capability this platform offers. But we will also maintain the innovative tactical approach that defined us during Rattlesnake. The understanding that doctrine is a guide, not a constraint. That adaptation and improvisation remain essential skills regardless of technological advantage." As the officers and NCOs dispersed to their units, Rawlins remained momentarily alone on the rise overlooking the tank park. In his mind's eye, he could see Blackwood standing there a year earlier, surveying the aging M60s with the quiet confidence of a man who understood that while machines changed, the principles of leadership remained constant. The Desert Wolves had evolved, as all military units must. The M60 Pattons that had performed so admirably during Rattlesnake were now museum pieces, replaced by the vastly superior Abrams. But the spirit Blackwood had instilled during that intense month in the Mojave remained the battalion's animating force. The understanding that in warfare, as in life, the human element remains decisive. That was Iron Sam's true legacy. Not the medals or the official recognition, but the philosophy he had lived by throughout his remarkable career. A philosophy now embedded in the DNA of the Desert Wolves, regardless of the platform they operated or the missions they undertook. As Rawlins turned to rejoin his battalion, preparing for another day of training with their new equipment, he carried that legacy forward, not as a burden but as a torch, illuminating the path for the next generation of tankers who would learn, as he had, that courage, skill, and moral clarity would always matter more than the technological specifications of their vehicle. That the tank was just steel, it was the tanker who mattered.